Welcome to another edition of MPW Digital Extra, presented by Rustic Revivals Furniture Company. I'm Neil McCready. Today on the show, we get you ready for another weekend of college football and the NFL with a trio of guests. First, we'll go to Baton Rouge. We'll visit with ESPN Louisiana's Matt Moscona. We'll get his thoughts on Ole Miss-LSU Saturday night in Baton Rouge, the shape of the SEC race, and more. Then we'll talk to Southeastern 14s and BandySports.com's Chris Lee about the Commodores' stunning upset of Alabama last week in Nashville. How did it happen? Is it a sign of things to come? And finally, Barstool's Ben Mintz joins for his weekly preview of college football and the NFL. Ben will be in Baton Rouge this weekend as well for Ole Miss and LSU. MPW Digital Extra is brought to you by Rustic Revivals, based out of Flowood, Mississippi. Rustic Revivals builds tables and other furnitures by hand with locally sourced lumber. The husband and wife team of Josh and Ashley Pierce specialize in custom-ordered tables, beds, dressers, coffee tables, bookshelves, decorative cabinets, and chairs. They have a limited selection of ready-for-pickup pieces available in their shop. Rustic Revivals delivers within 250 miles of Flowood. All pieces are sealed for protection. Podcast listeners can take 10% off their purchase by using the code REBELS10. That's REBELS10. The QR code's right there on the stream. Go to rusticrevivalsms.com or facebook.com/rusticrevivalsms or Rustic Revivals on Instagram. You can also order directly by calling 228-217-1243 or email rusticrevivals@gmail.com. I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. Clark Ford's in Amory, Mississippi, 662-257-1900 is the number. Call it. Ask for Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He will send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. Right to the bottom line. No hassle, no haggle. You get your quote, and the rest is completely up to you. You can shop that quote around. You can do what I've done, what I recommend that you do, and that's hop into a Clark Ford today. Again, 662-257-1900. Matt Moscona, Ben Mintz, Chris Lee, all join on the Campbell Clinic hotline. From fractures and sports injuries to complex spine and limb conditions, the pediatric orthopedic physicians at Campbell Clinic in Oxford are the only specialized pediatric orthopedic team in North Mississippi providing expert care for growing bodies. Visit CampbellClinicOxford.com to schedule an appointment or call 901-759-3111. And before we get to our guest, you know I've got to ask you this. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new spicy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love, and they turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, try spicy ghost pepper. Only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's. So now we go to the Campbell Clinic hotline. Matt Moscona from Baton Rouge getting you ready for Ole Miss and LSU, 6:30 on Saturday night on ABC. Here's Matt. Our buddy Matt Moscona has been around, I sort of say covers LSU, but he does more than that. He's radio in Baton Rouge. He's got LouisianaSports.net. He's got a lot going on, but, I mean, you sort of know him as a guy who is around LSU, covers LSU, criticizes LSU, praises LSU, all things LSU. Matt, welcome back into the show. Always great to have you.
Hey, Neil. I love LSU Ole Miss week. It certainly means you and I get to talk, which is always fun.
It is a fun week. It's one of the games that maybe it's my Louisiana roots. I don't know. I when I was in Mobile, I covered LSU a lot and developed a real fondness for game day there. Just the campus is sort of insane in a wild way, and sometimes it depends on your mood. There were times I'd walk through campus and I was like, "You people are out of your mind," and I'm not in the mood to deal with this. And sometimes I'd walk through and go, "God, this would be a lot of fun." I mean, if I could just sit here and go pop 10 beers and have fun with everybody, it would be a lot of fun. But it's always interesting, and the games are usually entertaining. The one last year, my God, was entertaining. So Ole Miss, LSU in Baton Rouge this time. It's at night, 6:30. I don't know, man. I'll start here. Like, I want to go, this feels like this really big game and almost a winner take all and a loser go home. But in today's SEC, where Alabama goes to Vanderbilt and loses, where Tennessee goes to Arkansas and loses, where Kentucky comes to Ole Miss and wins, and then Ole Miss goes to South Carolina, a team that blew out Kentucky, and Ole Miss basically blows out South Carolina, a team that could have easily beaten LSU. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know, like, whether a game is a really big game or not. I mean, you'd rather win it than lose it, but I don't know that the loser of this game Saturday night is as crippled as everybody necessarily thinks it is, and I don't know that the winner is necessarily on some free path to the playoff either.
Yeah, I agree on the winner of this game is certainly not home free. But I do think that whichever team takes a second loss, I do think that's a de facto elimination. I don't think Ole Miss has enough. I don't know that Ole Miss has enough meat on the second half of the schedule to overcome losses to Kentucky and LSU. And similarly, I don't think LSU is going unscathed after Ole Miss. So for LSU in particular, I think they got to win this game to get to 5-1. To have a chance to go 5-1 in the second half, get to 10-2, and see how your 10-2 stacks up against other teams, see if you get in the playoff. Now, I don't know if that's realistic, but if LSU doesn't win this game on Saturday, I do think that's a de facto elimination for LSU from playoff conversation this year. Remember, Neil, like when LSU lost in Oxford last year, that was their second loss in September. Now, Jaden Daniels was awesome, and he made the rest of the season a lot of fun because just watching him was worth watching the team. But that team was kind of playing out the string because in a 14 playoff, there had never been a two-loss team make the 14 playoff. So basically, by the time the calendar flipped to October, we knew LSU wasn't a playoff team. And I think it's going to have a similar feeling here. So I do think, you talked about some days you walk through campus and it's bonkers. That's going to be one of those days Saturday in Tiger Stadium. Night game, they're doing the 100-year celebration of Tiger Stadium. This will be the first time all year that LSU's actually had a home game at night that people are excited to see. They played UCLA here, but that was a 2:30 game, and it was just, there was record heat, and it just was a day where people didn't stay. So this is, people have been waiting for this one, man. The weather's getting a little nice. It was like 60 degrees this morning in Baton Rouge. Like, you can tell, like, it's that one where people are like, okay, it's time. It's time to crank up and go make Tiger Stadium a special venue for a night.
What do you think of this LSU team so far? They started in that weird game in Vegas where they didn't play terribly, but they lost. They had that weird first half, and you mentioned it was so hot. You saw UCLA literally wilt. I was trying to combine two words. In the second half.
They melted.
And if you think about it, it makes sense. But I might just start adapting that word. But they did. They just kind of wilted and went away, and LSU put them away. But that first half was kind of weird. You're like, you guys can't put UCLA away. What's going on? And then they blew out South Alabama, who had looked good a week earlier against App State, et cetera. But the weird game in Columbia, which can be a weird place to play. I was just there Saturday, where LSU easily could have lost that game, but they didn't. To their credit, they found a way to win it. What have you thought about this team going into the Ole Miss game on Saturday?
So Neil, they are exactly what I thought they were going to be. They were going to be a really good offensive team that wasn't as good as they were last year offensively, right? I mean, if you go pull up the conversation you and I had in July at Media Days, this is a lot of what I said was, look, it would be unrealistic to think they're going to lead the country in total and scoring offense again like they did last year. But can you be top 15, top 20? If you're an offense scoring 35, 38 a game, and your defense can just not be the worst ever, which they were last year, was the worst statistical defense in LSU history. Can you be top 60, top 50? Then you'll have a chance to win every game you play. It's not to say you're going to win, but you will have a chance to win every game you play. They've been clunky in the first month. South Alabama was the cleanest game they've played, and I get it, South Alabama. That's a team that creates some issues for defenses because they're a good, creative offensive team with some good skill guys. But this is a whole different test. with Ole Miss coming in, and now LSU is going to play 7 consecutive SEC games. But what they are right now, Neil, is what I thought they were going to be. A team that's really good, leading with offense, better but not good on defense, and a team that you hope, if you're LSU, continues to improve like Brian Kelly's last two teams have. From week 1 to the end of November, they improve. The real thing Brian Kelly's got to figure out is how to be better in September and not use September as a feeling out month. So you're ready to go, so you don't put yourself behind the 8 ball like they have now 3 years in a row.
So they're coming off an open date. I listened to his most of his press conference on Monday. He sounded like pretty pleased with his team the way that they sort of worked through the open date. Sounds like LSU's fairly healthy. You mentioned Tiger Stadium's going to be nutty. All that stuff, all the outside ancillary things sort of point in their favor. The question I have about LSU is pretty simple, is defensively, do they have enough to slow down Ole Miss? And Ole Miss's offense in SEC play has not been a rolling ball of butcher knives. It has been clunky. They don't run the ball as well as they did a year ago. They've not been as consistent throwing it against Kentucky and South Carolina. They've had moments, and they've had receivers open all over the field, and Jackson Dart has either missed them or not seen them after they destroyed the non-conference portion of their schedule. They just beat the ever-living hell out of everyone, and you didn't know, like, what are they? And I still don't really know what they are. I think this is a litmus test kind of game for what Ole Miss is. But I am curious, LSU defensively, they've got to make stops. They couldn't stop Ole Miss a year ago. Yeah. How much better equipped are they to do it this time around?
Neil, they couldn't stop anybody a year ago. I mean, Arkansas was a bad football team a year ago, and they came and put up 35 on LSU. LSU couldn't get them off the field. This is a more competent defense. I would say here's the biggest change that they've made. They have dramatically simplified things in the secondary. You know, there was no excuse for what happened last year. I'm not telling you LSU was going to be awesome or anything like that, but there's no excuse ever to score 49 and put up 600 yards of offense and lose. That's what they did. I mean, they gave up 700 yards and 55 points. That's just, in no reality is that ever acceptable. And I think everyone understands that. So what they've done is they've just dramatically oversimplified in the secondary, and so you haven't seen coverage busts. The plan is more, just don't get beat over the top. Don't give up the back-breaking 65-yard touchdown. Make the defense methodically, or the offense go methodically down the field against you. And bank on a costly penalty, a turnover, a missed, an errant throw, a drop, something like that puts you behind the sticks. I mean, I would say if you want to comp, look at the USC game. I'm sure a lot of people watch that. I think USC is probably the most comparable offense to Ole Miss that LSU's faced so far. Got a good veteran quarterback in Jackson Dart and Miller Moss there, two really creative play callers in Lincoln Riley, Lane Kiffin. I mean, hell, USC has a former running back from the state of Mississippi in Woody Marks. So there's a lot of similarities. I mean, LSU held them to 27. The longest run they gave up in the game was 17 yards. Yeah, that game was tied at 20 until SC scored with 8 seconds to go. I think that's LSU's path. I'm not sitting here telling you they're going to hold Ole Miss to 280 yards, and they're not going to do what Kentucky did. Right. I don't think they're capable of that.
Kentucky's good on that side of the ball. They're really good on that side of the ball.
It's odd to say this, Neil, but right now Kentucky's defensive personnel is better than LSU's. And LSU's got some really good young players that next year and the year following, maybe even by the end of this year, are going to be names people need to know. Y'all are going to see Ahmad Bro, who's a true freshman defensive tackle who's playing a lot, and he is a very technically sound player who keeps getting better every week. He's going to be a guy, by the time his career is done, that will have like all SEC potential. Not there yet, but he's good. He's a good young player. So like the cavalry's on the way, but LSU defensively right now doesn't have the skill that could. So I don't think they're going to be able to do what Kentucky did. But I do think the plan for LSU is to try to make this game feel a lot like that SC game did, where everyone's thinking that total is 64.5. Man, they're going to sail past that. I think both coaches have no desire to play a 55-49 game again. I think both coaches, and I watched Lane do it last week as well, especially after the Trey Harris injury, where I think they threw the ball one time in the fourth quarter.
That's correct.
Where Lane, who wants to typically go, got a little slow. I mean, he ain't no dummy. He knows the objective is to go win the football game, and the best path to do that. So, LSU can move the ball, and they need to sling it. They can go and they can score, but I don't think Brian Kelly wants to do that again on Saturday. So I think you are going to see a slower pace game.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what Ole Miss looks like in the event that Trey Harris can't go, or in the event that he's limited, or that he's just not the same dude, because Jackson Dart, he has been Jackson Dart's target, security blanket, everything. I mean, 52.
Neil, 52? I mean, that's
5.5 games. He didn't play in the second half against South Carolina. Yeah. I mean, he's their guy, and he's a threat. He's a deep threat. He's a possession receiver. It's a weird spot for him to be in this week, because I know this is a big game for Trey. It's a Louisiana native, and Hey, do you know? You probably know this. Do you know Trey Harris and Malik Neighbors were on the same team? Yeah.
Can you imagine Trey Harris at quarterback and Malik Neighbors at receiver on a high school field? You want to talk about unfair?
A buddy of mine, John Sokoloff, who covers Mississippi, Ole Miss, Mississippi State for the WCBI, he actually did a story early in the season where he talked to both of them. He got Malik on a Zoom from New York, and it was interesting. Malik gave a lot of credit for his personal success to Trey, because he was like, Trey was always, kind of an honor student, and Trey's a really bright kid. And he was like, he always kind of looked up to him like that. And Trey was always like, hey man, you're so good. You got to make your grades. You can't let something stupid stop you from where you're headed, and Trey was a basketball guy. This is a fun story, really. Trey was a basketball guy and was considering not playing football his senior year to focus on basketball, because he was getting some D1 interest. And it was Malik who begged him to play, because he's like, dude, this is a big year for me. I need someone to throw me the ball. We don't have anybody else here who's going to get me the ball. Where were they? Like Alexander Senior High or somewhere like that?
I think they were at Como, weren't they?
Maybe so, yeah. Yeah, Como, that's correct. That's right. Yeah. And so basically, Trey owes his staying in football to Malik, and Malik owes a whole lot of his not screwing up academically, because apparently there were some touch and go moments where he just really didn't care and he didn't study and blah, blah, blah. So they really helped each other, and I think they're really tight. And you go back and look at that game last year, and those two guys on the same field, and you're like, wow. Couple of
I was just looking.
Freaks.
Harris, I just looked it up, went 8 for 153 in a score last year. I mean, Neil, I'm sure you've talked tons about it with your audience. And I don't know, I was watching the game against South Carolina on Saturday. When Trey left the game, it didn't look good. So I don't know. You'll know much better than I about if he's available. I heard Lane say they're preparing to play without him. That's not to say he won't go, but man, that fundamentally, if Trey Harris can't go, it just fundamentally changes the game. And I will say this, Neil, I'm a big believer. I know you've heard me say this because we talk every year, but I'm a big believer in not just who you play, but when and where you play them. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons, we all do the exercise or media days or whatever, you fill out the schedule, where's your wins and losses. The primary reason that I thought LSU would win this game back in July was this is 7 straight games for Ole Miss, 3 straight conference games, back-to-back road conference games. And LSU's coming off a bye, and they get the game at home. The situation leans LSU because of that. Now, the flip side of that, Neil, is there's a lot of LSU fans that don't like. I've been telling them, hey, y'all better watch out for going to College Station, because you're going to A&M after you play Ole Miss at Arkansas, then you're at A&M. Meanwhile, A&M's off this week, then they play, I think, Mississippi State, and then they got LSU. That's a huge lean spot for A&M with LSU going to Kyle Field. So, look, we saw it this weekend. Missouri went to A&M and got pummeled. Tennessee went to Arkansas and got pummeled. Vandy went to or Bama went to Vandy and lost, which is still just hilarious. I love saying that. I'm going to enjoy that forever.
I'm going to.
I just think it's
because I thought about you Saturday night.
I just think but the point, like to bring it back to the point about Trey Harris, and I was watching the game, and I saw Pegues go off, I saw Walter Nolan go off, and I'm like, man, this is. I'm never cheering for an injury. Don't misunderstand me. Like I want all those kids to be healthy and to play. But if you're just looking objectively at what that means, Ole Miss to me looks like a banged up team coming into Baton Rouge, and LSU looks healthy, and that's something that may favor LSU on Saturday.
No, listen, I mean, I always do the whole football gods, get thing and gig, I guess. And it's always someone has said, well, if you could ask the football gods one thing, to give you a tip, I'd say, what's Harris's deal? And for Trey, that's what I was saying. It's a weird spot, right? Because the way that looked, I don't know that he's going to be 100%. I know he wants to play this game. I know this season matters to him. He's one of those dudes who cares a lot. Yet he's got to think about his future. And, you can't go play hurt if you're too hurt. I mean, it's one thing to kind of play. It's one thing to play hurt. It's another thing to play injured. And so he's got to be aware of that. And, Lane is so coy about injuries. He does not that's the whole gig with the injury reports now. And he basically lists half the roster. It's just his way. Right. It's his way of saying, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. I'm going to play along, but I'm not going to really play along. And so Harris is going to be questionable game time decision. He's just not going to, and it drives fans crazy at people like me. Like, why can't you tell us what the deal is? Because I don't know, man. I mean, they're buttoned up. You'll hear different little things, but I don't know. But if Harris doesn't play, I think it fundamentally changes Ole Miss's offense because they don't have that great running attack this year. They do have other receivers. Juice Wells is certainly someone you have to account for. Jordan Watkins, the same. They've got a couple of good tight ends. But everybody's got to move up if you don't have Trey Harris. Lane loves basketball analogies. Losing Trey Harris is taking your star small forward off the court, the guy who gets 26 and 11 night in and night out. And you still have good players, but now you ask them to go take a bigger role. And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't.
Yeah, look, man, there's nobody on LSU's team there's no Derek Stingley, there's no Christian Fulton, there's no Patrick Peterson or Morris Claiborne or Tre'Davious White, or like all those guys that LSU's rolled out over the years that you're just like, you got him, right? Just take away half the field. That guy's not there. So Trey Harris is a real problem, for LSU. That's a tilt the field guy. If he's not there, it changes the math defensively for LSU. One thing to keep in mind is that LSU's best guy is Zy Alexander. And he missed the South Alabama game in the concussion protocol, but he is back. So it's interesting, man. LSU, especially in the secondary, Neil, used the month of September after the SC game. They used those next 4 games to just roll guys in and out of the secondary. I mean, they were playing like 6 dudes at safety. And it really was, hey, we think we're going to win all these games. Let's just get as many guys, as many reps as possible to see who we can trust, and then commit to those guys during the open date. So now we don't get to watch practice at this point. And Brian Kelly, who's usually very forthcoming, when he's been asked about what guys emerged, he's been tight-lipped. So I don't know who they're going to count on at safety, and who's going to be the nickel. But I'll tell you, if I had to take my money to a ticket window in Vegas, that Zy Alexander and Ashton Stamps will be the starting corners, and that's your best 2 guys. But neither one of those guys is going to get all America or all conference consideration at all. They're not those guys. Stamps can be a really good player as he continues to grow and develop. He's a young sophomore, but none of those guys is running one-on-one with Trey Harris, I'll tell you that much. So that's, for every reason that you all think it should be a storyline, it is a major storyline this week. Probably the biggest.
I think so too. Another one is this. obviously with Jaden Daniels, you had to be careful with pass rush integrity because the guy was so incredibly athletic. And look what he's doing in Washington. I mean, he's off to a fantastic start to his NFL career, which is no surprise. I like Nussmeier. I like him a lot. I've talked to some NFL people who think he's a first-round pick, perhaps already. I know that there's possibility that he comes back for another season and really elevates that status. But regardless, he's not the elite athlete that Daniels is running around. Ole Miss is much better at rushing the passer. They've got weapons up front. Yet LSU, that's kind of what they're known for, is that offensive line, Will Campbell, a bunch of athletes. To me, it's the most exciting thing to watch. Like, to put your binoculars on something this weekend, it's when LSU has the football, watch the line of scrimmage. There's going to be some dudes going against each other. How do you sort of see that particular matchup shaking out?
Yeah, man. Through 5 games, LSU's allowed 2 sacks. One of the reasons Garrett Nussmeier has, I know Jackson Dart as well, but you look at all the national rankings of everything and, passing yards, completions, touchdowns, what Garrett's, on all those lists is because he's been upright, man. South Carolina created some problems, but that's really it. So it's one of those things where when Will Campbell over 3 years as the starting left tackle has allowed 2 sacks in 3 years, you kind of just go, okay, like, I'm going to give that guy the edge until you prove me otherwise.
Yeah, it's fair.
So, with complete and total respect, I know what Ole Miss has on the defensive line. Those guys look awesome. What they brought in with Walter Nolan and with Princely, whose name I never get right, so I'm not even going to try.
He's not playing Saturday. I'll just tell you that.
He's out. Okay.
If he's available, it's on a limited basis, and my guess is that he's not back until the Oklahoma game. Ole Miss has an open after this, and then Oklahoma in 2 weeks. That just makes more sense.
Yeah. Pegues is an impressive dude to look at. They're good. They're good, Neil. I get that they're all really good, but that's good on good. And LSU has played good on good matchups, and their line wins. So I'm not saying Ole Miss can't get pressure or won't. I'm just saying nobody else has. So if they do, good on them. They will have earned it. But I think that's a spot that LSU counts on being really good and keeping Garrett upright to be able to throw to a whole bunch of really good receivers. The bigger question that has really persisted for this offense is their ability to run the football. And that has been hit or miss. Now, Brian Kelly has insisted the reason that they haven't run it, and it is an imbalanced pass to run. There is no 50-50 in this offense. Brian Kelly insists it's because they haven't gotten fair boxes. And if teams are going to stack the line of scrimmage, you got a veteran quarterback and good receivers, you're just going to throw it. And so they do, and they have, and they've done it really well. So I'll be interested to see if they're able to run the ball against Ole Miss. South Alabama gave them a more base look, and LSU ran like crazy against them. So, what does Ole Miss choose to do defensively? That'll be interesting. I'd also say watch Caden Durham. I don't know if many of your listeners or Ole Miss fans know that name yet.
Really good. But young freshman, looks the part too.
Yeah, and it's weird. So he's a true freshman from Duncanville in Texas. And Neil, Brian Kelly gives us a lot of access during camp. We got to watch every practice for at least an hour, every practice. I would not have told you that Caden Durham flashed at all in fall camp. I watched him practice 15 times, and I would have never. I might not have a note in my notebook about Caden Durham. It was as surprising to me as anyone but he got his opportunity against South Carolina. John Emery tore his ACL. They needed depth. They gave Durham an opportunity, and boom! He went off, and then he just hasn't really slowed. So maybe they found something there. Maybe it's the competition you played. I will point out that against South Alabama, he didn't play in the second half, and I was told, and we reported this over at LouisianaSports.net, that he dislocated 2 toes. Oh. I have no idea how easy or hard it is to come back from dislocated toes. That sounds like that sucks, especially if you're a running back. So again, a spot where the open date probably came at a really good time for LSU, but that is something to watch as well. How effective is Durham with that injury?
All right. Ole Miss people love to give you hell because of your post-game show and stuff, and I always remind them, you have a really good pulse on this game. 2 years ago when Ole Miss was just flying high, you were consistent. LSU's going to win this game. It's not going to be close. And they did.
Ole Miss fans didn't like that, Neil. They didn't like that at all.
Now, they liked it better last year when going into the game. You were like, I don't think LSU can stop Ole Miss from scoring.
And they didn't.
You were like, LSU's going to score a lot of points, but I don't know that they can score enough because I literally don't think LSU can stop them from scoring. And you nailed it. Ole Miss went for 700 plus and 55 points. I mean, you give up 49 points and still win. Your offense was cruising. So you've been really good at this. So here you go. What happened Saturday night?
Yeah, I think Ole Miss fans are going to like this, Neil. I love the spot for LSU, and I did pick LSU in the preseason. I just thought they'd probably be further along defensively. I really do think the odds makers have this right. Like, I think this is a coin flip game, but I don't know that people bet if you do, like I've said, but I think there's a play to the under here. I do not think this is a game that these teams are scoring in the mid upper 30s. I think this is. I think Brian Kelly is going to try to replicate that Southern Cal game and try to play a 27-24 type game. And I think that's what we're going to see. A 27-24, 27-20, something like that. Maybe it gets like a 31. You're tied at 24 and somebody scores late. I just, maybe because it's you and I are talking here on Tuesday, maybe I reserve the right to change my mind. I think if Trey Harris doesn't play, that might tilt me toward LSU because of the spot. It's hard for me to pick LSU in this one, though, Neil. I just think Ole Miss is probably more balanced offensively, and I think defensively, especially in the front seven, they're just better. And if LSU becomes one-dimensional and they get behind, which I think they are, here's a prediction for you, Neil. Here's a prediction for you.
All right.
Ole Miss is going to get the ball at the start of the game and go right down the field and go up 7-0.
They typically do. Yeah.
They always do. Yeah, I'm not going out on a limb here, man.
Yeah.
They're going to go right down the field and score. I'll be curious to see how Blake Baker adjusts and what those adjustments look like. But yeah, man, I'd probably pick Ole Miss to win a close one. But this is one, if I'm a betting man, I'm completely staying away because I think this is a 4-quarter game that will come down to the last possession. Whoever has the ball will have a chance to win the game on a kick or a late score or something like that. I have very little confidence picking this game. I just think the one thing I'm confident is neither coach wants a game like a year ago, and both are equipped to not play a game like a year ago and maybe slow it down a bit. So I think that's probably what we see.
All right, I'm going to get your thoughts on a few other things, then I'm going to let you go. I appreciate your time immensely. But I thought of you Saturday night in Columbia. I was doing post-game. Lane's interview, all that stuff was happening. I don't know if you've ever been in the visiting media room at Williams-Brice. They've got a TV.
No, I haven't.
Okay, they've got a TV up in the corner, and we were watching it before Lane came in, and Lane comes in and is distracted from the get-go with staring up at the screen, and he's answering questions, but he's not looking at people, and he normally does look at people, and instead he's looking above them and around them, and I'm watching him trying to get reaction to see what's going on in Vanderbilt, Alabama. And ultimately it went final with Lane basically sitting there, and it was wild. He's like, you guys ought to watch this because it might never happen again in our lifetime. It was a funny little typical Lane jab of everyone.
Yeah.
But I thought of you as I left the media stuff to go back to the press box to work. I thought, look at Moscona. He's got the night off. LSU's not playing. It's 6:30, 7 o'clock. He's probably poured a little bit of something into a glass. And Vanderbilt just beat the Tide. And I thought about you. I thought you had to have been one of your more just guilty pleasure moments right there. I literally was like, I wish I could hang with Moscona right now for a few minutes. This would be a lot of fun.
Have you seen the open to my show from Monday yet?
I'm not.
Okay. This is, I would say it's a selfish plug, but I mean, I really,
I will go find it.
if you go to YouTube, search AFR LSU, after further review LSU, you'll see it. Trust me, you will notice. You will see the thumbnail immediately. You will know what it is. So you know, I actually think it's so funny how I've kind of been, and this really isn't my MO, but I've kind of been branded as the Bama burning guy. It was so funny at media days in July that damn near everybody I talked to brought that up. Yeah. And I mean, Neil, the thing is, like, I understand there is not a soul that is going to take anything I say about Alabama with an ounce of objectivity ever again. And I have earned that, okay? And I will wear that.
Part into the bit, yeah.
But Neil,
it worked.
That's the thing. Like, you just said the word bit. I mean,
yeah.
Like,
I get it. I do this for a living. I understood. I mean, people are like, that guy's crazy. I'm like, no, it's a bit. And the fact that you, an Ole Miss person, is watching his post game of LSU, USC, or LSU, whoever, is proof that it worked. It's why it worked. It's why
it's supposed to be fun, man.
People do the thing about Paul, right? And Paul and I have had our differences over the years and stuff, but I get why the SEC pays him what they pay him. At the end of the day, it's because whether you like the show or not, or I like the show or not, obviously people do, because they're getting numbers in the middle of the freaking day on Tuesday and Wednesday. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's not my cup of tea, but it doesn't mean that it's not. They do have some analytics to support what they're doing. And
right.
You guys do that post-game show, and it's hilarious, but the numbers are off the chain. And I'm like, look at their numbers. Look at the numbers. The numbers tell you it works. But the Bama part's been great, because you do all the Bama stuff, and then when they really lose a game, people think of you.
That's the craziest part, is like that I've really been branded in that way, to where that's what everybody thought. They want to see whatever I had to say about Bama. But here's the thing, Neil. Like, what I do, my job is to inform and to entertain. I hope people leave and they feel like, man, that I learned something, and at least, or that was thought provoking, and that was fun. So I love that part of radio and of media. So I'll give you a tease, Neil. I put on a Grim Reaper costume for the start of the show. That should be the tease enough to go watch it. But if I was going to give you a very, like, if I was going to get, so all the Bama is burning stuff from the day Nick retired to now, if I were to just give you a very this is what I've said. Okay, I'm going to give you a very sensible way of saying, instead of putting flames on the screen, playing O Fortuna and yelling and acting crazy and giving like crazy eyes and everything. This is my point. Okay. This has been my point about Alabama. You don't lose the greatest coach ever and not feel it. You can't turn over half your roster in 1 year, which Alabama did. They lost like 41 scholarship players from a year ago. You don't lose half your roster and not feel it. I'm not saying Alabama's bad. I'm not saying they're going to go 6-6. I'm not saying Kalen DeBoer's a bad coach. I think Kalen DeBoer's a very good coach. And Alabama has a great roster and great resources and boosters that'll spend a lot of money and a good recruiting base, and all. Like, they're going to be still good. But Nick Saban created an impossible standard to meet. He won 6 national titles in a 12-season span. That will never happen again, ever. He is literally the greatest coach ever. You cannot lose that person and half your roster and not miss a beat. It's just, we all watch football, man. I've given the example that I'm a Saints fan, and at 2011, the Saints had the best offense in the history of the NFL. No offense ever, not even the greatest show on turf, put up more yardage than the 2011 Saints. In that offseason, Sean Payton, Bountygate, he's gone. They tried everything, man. They structured the coaching staff a certain way. Drew Brees was still there. All the same players. They won 7 games, missed the playoffs. You can't lose the general and not feel it. And so that's the point I've made about Alabama all along. And when your standard and that fan base's standard expectation has been what Nick has created for 17 years, it is an impossible standard to meet. So if Kalen DeBoer over the next 5 years goes 9-3 every year, wins a bowl game, gets to 10 wins by almost anybody's standards, that's great success. By Alabama standards, that is a cataclysmic failure. And it's already been 3 years since they won a national title, and I don't think they're winning it this year, so that's going to be 4. And I don't think they're winning it next year, so that'll be 5. And then every year that passes, you start to get a little more antsy to go, what are we doing? It's been so long. I'm not used to this. And that's when you start to panic. And I think that's what's going to happen to that program. Okay, so that's the very sensible way to say what I've been yelling about with Flames in the background and playing 0-4 Tuna for the last 9 months, and everybody laughs and the clips go viral, and I love it. And they don't realize, Neil, that if they would just stop reacting to me, I would stop doing it. But every time I do one, it's just like you kick the anthill and they scurry again. It's like they're just too dumb to realize I'm just messing with them, but it's fun, so I'll keep doing it.
Vanderbilt. I mean, and Clark.
It couldn't have been better.
Right?
Couldn't have been better. Neil,
it wouldn't have been the same.
I wanted Georgia. I wanted Georgia to suffocate Alabama for 4 quarters. They did it for 2. The second half, I think they had allowed 16 rushing yards in the second half. Then whenever they got down 28 and rallied, I'd say, oh, this is better. Yeah. Like blowing a 28-point lead is better. And then, of course, they won. But none of that could have even come close to this. Freaking Vanderbilt. And Neil, Vandy didn't win on a fluke. Vandy held the ball for 42 minutes, put up 400 yards and 40 points. And even at the end of the game, when they scored on that cockamamie end around, and Vandy got the ball, and you're thinking, oh, well, here's the sphincter check moment. You know, Vandy's going to go into a shell. They're going to punt. Bama's going to have the ball with too much time. They're going to go score and win. And Vandy went right down the field and ran out the clock. I mean, it was just like Vanderbilt owned the line of scrimmage against Alabama. And Bama fans have got to realize, like, that's your new reality. You live in a world where you can lose to Vanderbilt, which hasn't been your reality for 2 decades, but it is now.
And it's the reality of this league right now, is that, and they're part of it. And, I mean, Georgia's not immune to it, right? Georgia could have easily lost to Kentucky, did lose to an Alabama team that I think at the end of the day is just going to be a good team. There's no, let me rephrase, there aren't many freebies in the league, like at all. And everybody's pretty invested. Some are really invested. And man, I just don't know that anybody's going to be doing the whole 12-0 thing the way that we all before the season were like, well, these 2 teams are going to go 12-0 and these 3 are going to go 11-1 and 10-2 is going to get you. I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, it's going to be hard for people to go 10-2 in this league.
Yeah. Georgia, Georgia last year was, it's so crazy. Like, they went 3 years without losing a game in the regular season. And I just, like, do you realize before that Bama game, the last regular season loss they had was the Florida game in the COVID year?
Yeah, they had not lost.
Unbelievable.
It's unreal.
But I just think, Neil, one of the other things, I know I've referenced Media Days a couple times because, we always go there in the summer and we like live in this SEC cocoon for 4 days. Yeah. And it's just this big echo chamber and everybody's saying the same things and asking the same questions and it's just stuff bouncing everywhere. But I made it a point to ask everybody, like, how many teams do you think the SEC gets in? And everybody said, oh, minimum 4, probably 5 or 6. And my thing all along has been minimum 3. And if you go back and look at the 4-team playoff, look at the last decade, if you would go look at those penultimate rankings, right, the ones that determine who was playing in the playoff, there was only 3 years of the last 10 that the SEC would have had 4 teams.
Yeah.
3 in the last 10. And in 2 of those years, Neil, in 2015 and 2016, there was only one SEC team in the top 11 of the rankings. It was Alabama. It was 2015 and 16. Like, we just assume, oh, SEC 10-2, you're in. Well, Big Ten fans are thinking the same thing as well. And by the way, it's really freaking hard to go 10-2 in the regular season. Yeah. It's a hard thing to do. And even if you have multiple teams do it, well, how does your 10-2 look compared to other teams 10-2? So I think everyone is probably going to get a pretty rude awakening on that this year, and you're kind of checking it right now, because if you go back and look at those everybody's bowl projections from 3 weeks ago, you'd have seen 6, 7 SEC teams in there, not no more. I mean, it's much cloudier now.
You did this before the season. I think you put it on social media. I saw it. You were talking about how at LSU the expectation is make the playoff. Now that it's a 12-team playoff, the expectation at LSU is make the playoff, because they won national championship with Nick Saban. They won a national championship with Les Miles. Hell, they won a national championship with Ed Orgeron. You should make the playoff. And you were the one. That's why I always tell people, I'm like, man, back off that homer stuff, because he's more of a realist. You pointed out that if you used the current formula, LSU would have made the playoff over the last, I don't know, under 15 years. It was like 3 times. And
it was so over the last decade of the 14 playoff, when they've used this committee, they made it twice. Yeah. It was so the 2019 Burrow team, and the year before that in 2018 they were 9-3, but they would have been the last team in as the 11 seed, which is just a weird thing how that all transpired with some upsets. But
it's going to lead so many people doing the whole this team X underachieved, coach X didn't do a good job. That's coming, and obviously, and it was this past weekend was the first weekend that I went, oh wow, this is really happening. It wasn't just Alabama losing at Vandy; it was then turning around, and a few hours later, I mean, I got back to my hotel. The third quarter of Tennessee Arkansas had just started. And you kept waiting for Tennessee to go, okay, they're going to go suffocate Arkansas, go win the game by 10 points. It's fine. And then they didn't. And ultimately, Arkansas won the game. And you're like, wow. So Tennessee's going to have at least 2 losses, probably 3 losses, maybe 4 losses. Alabama's going to lose more games. LSU, Ole Miss play in a week. One of them's going to lose. L's are going to pile up. And at some point, you're probably going to have enough L's that the committee's going to do the committee thing where they start slipping everybody else in, because that's kind of what they want to do anyway.
Yep. They're looking for path of least resistance. If you're a 9-3 team, but there's a P4 school that's 10-2, that 10-2 is probably getting over the 9-3 just because it's easier to explain. But you know what? You mentioned that Tennessee-Arkansas game, and I'm sure an Ole Miss fan, I'm sure, could do this very same thing. You could watch another SEC game and do what I'm about to tell you, but watching that game, and Tennessee's left tackle in that game was Lance Hurd, and the right defensive end for Arkansas was Landon Jackson. Both of those guys were LSU players that transferred. Think about what that does, just to illustrate why it's so hard to build consistency, is your depth. Like, if Landon Jackson and Lance Hurd were still on LSU's team, I mean, God, Landon Jackson makes your you're adding an All-America caliber, projected first-round type guy to your defensive line. Lance Hurd was a 5-star from North Louisiana, from Neville, who came to LSU last year for one season, sitting behind Will Campbell, left. Now he's a starting left tackle at Tennessee. But if you're LSU, think about this. You're losing Will Campbell after this season. How much better would you feel if you had Lance Hurd ready to step in?
Totally different deal.
Now you got a big question. So I think that's why the consistency. Like I've said, I'm sure you're watching Ole Miss games. I'm sure there's games where you're looking around going, well, that guy, if we had that guy, who left.
Every time Ohio State plays, I look at that and go, you put Judkins on this team with Trey Harris and Juice Wells and a third-year Jackson Dart and a defense that doesn't it's good enough that they don't have to feel like they have to score every time they get the ball. Yeah, and I mean, the Judkins thing pisses off a lot of people because he was a giant pain in the ass, and the people around him were a giant pain in the ass. And yes, he impacted chemistry in a negative way. But dude, he was good. And they gave him the ball a lot, and he could catch it out of the backfield. He was pretty good in pass pro. And when you needed those 2 yards, you could just kind of give it to him. And more often than not, he got it. And sometimes he'd break that 40-yard run that would break your back a little bit. And I don't know that they have that, with Henry Parrish and Matt Jones, and Bentley's not playing. And you look around and you're like, boy, you'd feel better about that. And like, to your point, at the end of this season, kind of no matter how it ends, Ole Miss is losing like 40-something guys off this team. I mean, you're going to feel that next year. It's one of the reasons that this year's been so big for people is that, look, maybe there's a world where they transfer portal a team together next year that's just as good. I kind of doubt it, but maybe.
Yeah.
But even if you do, I mean, you have a lot of chemistry stuff you got to do, culture stuff you got to do. The odds are you're going to take a step back in 2025. Doesn't mean it's going to be a big step. Doesn't mean that it's not just a blip on the radar step, but it's a step. And so this is that big moment. And yeah, you're right. You look around and, yeah, if LSU had Landon Jackson, they'd be a different defense right now. I think he's the most underrated defensive player in the league.
I'll tell you, there's I do think both LSU and Ole Miss, and this is something to watch not only this year but moving forward. I think the way that Lane is going about building his roster and the way Brian Kelly's going about building his are pretty diametrically opposed. And I don't know which is right. I'm not saying one is right or good or bad or wrong, because I think everybody has the same objective in the end, which is get to the playoff and win it. But what Brian Kelly is trying to do is build through the high school ranks, develop those players, and then supplement with guys in the portal. It's harder than ever to do because of what we just talked about. Like, can you recruit a 4 or 5 star guy, have him wait? Probably not. But that's his approach. It's what he's trying to do. And if he's able to succeed, then you insulate yourself from what you just said, the year where you're going to have 40 guys of your roster turnover. Now, the flip side of it is, I really understand and respect what Ole Miss did this year. Like, they recognized, very clear, it's very obvious to everybody, looked at the schedule, Jackson Dart coming back and Trey Harris, like, you had dudes coming back, and you said, this is a real shot to do something like we've literally never done here, or haven't done in 60 years here. Like, let's go all in. And we see it in the NFL too, Neil. I mean, the Eagles a couple of years ago were an all-in team. The Broncos, when they got Peyton Manning, were all in. Hell, the Saints went all in those last few years of Drew Brees, just desperate to try. They said, the hell with the salary cap, we'll figure it out later. Let's try to win another title while we have Brees here. And they got close, but now they just keep kicking the can down the road, and they don't have the championship to show for it. So, but then the Broncos got one under Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
But the Broncos played 2 Super Bowls, won one of them, and for a decade they've not been able to figure out quarterback since. Haven't been back to the playoffs in a decade. But they won a Super Bowl. Was it worth it? Yeah, I'd say yeah. I'd take a Super Bowl for that.
Yeah.
So I understand. A long way of saying it, but I just thought of it when you talked about that. I just I'm going to be really, because none of us really know. I mean, it's a new era. And whenever we have a decade or whatever to sample size, we'll look back and say, okay, well, here's the best path to go about navigating this era, the playoff, portal, NIL era. But Kelly and Kiffin are doing it very different ways. It'll be interesting to see which works. Maybe neither works, but we'll see.
I do think it's interesting that if Kiffin had his druthers, if he felt like he could do at Ole Miss what Kelly is trying to do at LSU, he would try to do it as well. I think it's interesting about Lane. He always is very critical of this, and then he'll turn around and go, "But look, it's the system, and I'm going to use it as long as it's the system. I'm not going to protest it to the point of hurting myself. We'll just go use it."
Yeah.
I don't think he likes it. I think he thinks a lot of this is silly. The players opting out after 4 games to save the year for the portal. He understands it, but he hates it. He thinks it's stupid.
Yeah.
It's not good. Anyway, I've kept you way too long. Looking forward to Saturday night. I know I typically don't see you on game day because you're moving out and stuff, but we'll visit soon. I'll talk to you on your show later this week. Thanks, Matt.
I'll be at Don Juan Cigar Bar with T-Bob, ready for that post-game show. See all the Ole Miss fans there.
There'll be some that get there, I suspect.
It's a good time no matter what, man. Yeah. We look forward to seeing everybody.
I'll watch one way or the other. I appreciate you as always, my friend. Thank you.
All right, man. See you.
Chris Lee covers the SEC for Southeastern 14 on YouTube. He also is a longtime Vanderbilt beat writer, covers the Doors for VandySports.com. Chris, didn't expect 2 or 3 weeks ago that I would be on the week of LSU Ole Miss that I would be talking about Vanderbilt, but here we are talking about Vanderbilt. Welcome into the show. First of all, thanks for being with me.
Yeah, it's fun. This is the week where I finally get to see how everybody else on Beats has it.
So I'll tell people this story. I hope you don't mind. It was Friday morning. I had landed in Columbia. I'd rented my car. I'd gone to the hotel just to see if by chance I could check in early, and I couldn't. And so I was actually in the hotel, though. I was kind of like getting my thoughts together about what I wanted to do. I did not feel well. I could not speak. My voice was gone. And I looked down, and it's you on the phone calling me, and I had to think for a minute, why is he calling me? What's something going on with Vanderbilt? And I was like, maybe he wants me to come on a show. And I was like, Chris, I'm not going to be able to talk. And anyway, you're telling me about one of your kind of intern guys, young guy, had talked to a Vanderbilt football player and had given him a quote of, well, we're going to beat Alabama. And you were trying to figure out, what do I do with this? Because like I told you, I said, well, they're not going to beat Alabama, and you're just creating this firestorm of stuff, right? And I didn't think anything else about that conversation, Chris, on Saturday until, I got up Saturday, I did my thing, I went to Bryce Williams Stadium, what do they call it? Williams Bryce Stadium, and I covered that game. And as the Ole Miss game is winding down, we're starting to talk. We on press row are noting the Alabama Vanderbilt score. And as it gets later and later, we're like, son, bitch, this is real. And I thought about you. I was like, well, Chris doesn't have that problem anymore. I mean, and then it happened. I mean, it's just, you got to take me through as a guy who's covered Vanderbilt for as long as you've covered them, has covered so many just losing seasons. Yeah. What has this year kind of been like? And then what was Saturday like from your perspective?
Yeah, I'll walk you back through the year. I mean, as you get older, you just have less energy. And we've been doing this a long time. And I'm in fall camp and I'm watching them. And I mean, they can't string 2 first downs together for anything, right? And fall camp, there's a lot that goes on. It's hard to judge a running game because they blow the plays dead. And they're going to be primarily running. And they got all these new pieces and this new offense and this quarterback that just got there in the summer. And so you're like thinking, okay, this could go a number of ways. You got to give them some leeway because it's a lot of new. But then it's also Vanderbilt. And usually when it looks bad, it is bad. And that's kind of the side you go on. And I remember thinking one day, I'm just like, it's been an awful decade. I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, all right, the last 4 years, they've won 2 games. That's 2 TWO against Power 5 teams in 4 seasons. And by the way, if you want to get outside the Power 5, they've lost to UNLV, they've lost to East Tennessee State. But I'm like, I've covered a lot of bad stuff, but this feels like it's like even bad for Vanderbilt. And so I just, out of curiosity, I took, 30, 45 minutes and started adding up, like, how bad has this been?
Yeah.
And so I took all I don't know why, I guess it's just what you have to do on the beat, when you're covering Vanderbilt. It's like, I wonder, like, how many points have they lost by? And they have scored, coming into this year against Power 5 teams this decade, 572 points. They've lost by 838, which means if you do the math, they've given up 1,410 points.
Wow.
It's like, and it's like the frog boiling in the pot. You're just like, okay, 600, 1,000. What's the difference at this point?
Yeah.
But and I'm going through fall camp, and look, you know that again, the new, Jerry Kill's got a reputation for this. You know what Diego Pavia did last year, but I'm like, I'm standing next to the kid, and I'm 5'10" and a half-ish, and I think I'm an inch taller than him. And I'm just going, I don't know. And so, we don't get to see the last week of fall camp. And I'm just telling people, look, the defense got a lot of stops in camp. My guess is Clark Lee's a defensive coach, and they'll be better on that side of the ball. But the offense, they're going to have to make some. And lo and behold, they come into Virginia Tech, and the world saw it. Like, okay, let's see if they can do it again. And then next week they go out, they beat the crap out of whoever it was, Alcorn State, and then they lose to Georgia State. And they're like, all right, my world can return to normal now. And then they go and they take Missouri.
I remember writing. I remember writing.
Yeah.
Well, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, I mean, we all thought it.
Yeah.
And then they go to Missouri and they lose in double overtime. And you're like, okay, I've seen this happen before, because they'll every once or twice a year they'll give somebody a good fight, and you always know how it ends. And so I'm having to write stuff. I'm doing some stringing for like field level. It's like when you read these generic recaps and previews, a lot of times I'm the guy writing, and I'm almost doing it at this point because I feel sorry for him. I mean, the money isn't really worth it. The time's not worth it. But these poor souls have got to find some poor sap to cover Vanderbilt, and they pay me some money over there. It's like, sure. And so I'm writing the like how, because when you're writing that story, there's no sense in saying, Alabama beat them by 59 points last time they're playing. I mean, you're finding something that could be interesting. And so I'll write basically, okay, here's how it's got to go. They got to control the ball. They got to not turn it over. And they got to deal with Ryan Williams in a running game. And I'm just adding it up in my head. I'm going, they're bound to turn the ball over.
Yeah.
It's freaking Alabama.
They're a 24-point home underdog. I mean, there's a reason for that.
Yeah, and look, if you want to go, if you really want to dive in, I mean, I've given you a lot of bad already, but like you start looking at what Georgia and Alabama and the big boys have done to them, and it's really ugly. And so I'm writing like, well, they've, Pavia's been a headache for teams to contain. They're not turning the ball over. They have been getting penalties if they cut down on those. But, it's like the snowball's chance, right? And like, right. I think I've told you, like, I've covered so many games that every now and then there's a happy accident and they do something you didn't expect. And I always try to, like, in the back of my head, think of, okay, what is there like something and I remember distinctly driving to my parking spot and thinking, no, it's Alabama. It's just not. So then they get up 23-7. And I'm just thinking, is this going to be, they gave it a good fight and they lost by 7 in the end because somebody scored a last minute, or is this going to be Alabama just scores 52 points in a row and you never knew it was a close game? But there were two things. The first drive of the game, Neil, go back and watch it. They kind of pushed Alabama around up front, which, like, that's not something I had on the bingo card. And the first touchdown, Cedric Alexander has a hole. He meets a defender like at the 5, and he just shoves his way into the end zone. And a couple guys are pushing him in, like, okay, that got my attention. 3 plays later, they get a pick 6. So, like, okay, now Alabama's got a hole to cry out of. And Alabama gets a touchdown right before half, and then they're like, oh, so of course they're getting the kickoff. And like, all right, they're within 2 scores, and they're getting the ball. We kind of know where this is headed. And then it didn't go that way. And probably, I don't remember when or what it was, but middle of the third quarter, end of the third quarter, I'm like, if you didn't know which team was Alabama and which team was Vanderbilt, you might have a hard time figuring out by watching the game. And at that moment, I'm like, you know what? This might be the day.
When it went down, so Ole Miss kind of dominated South Carolina. The game was kind of over. And for the people that are watching this and listening to this, you're just watching two kind of guys do inside baseball a little bit. And we apologize. But I was so focused on, okay, I need to get my column written so that I can load it immediately. And then I'm kind of working on some notebook things, and I'm got some questions that I've left myself, and I was setting up some content. And I kept thinking, well, I know what's going to happen. Alabama's going to score 21 fourth quarter points, and and so I wasn't even allowing myself to pay attention to it. And at South Carolina, they don't let you down on the field. So I went straight to the media room, and they had the Ole Miss game was inside the final minute, and it was over. So I wasn't paying attention to it. And they had Vanderbilt, Alabama up on the screen. And I looked at it, and that was the very first time that it got real to me. I was like, whoa, this could actually happen. And then I think the Williams score happened, and you're like, it's not happening.
Yep.
And then Vanderbilt just started eating the clock. And the clock, and we're waiting for Lane Kiffin to come in to do post game. And I remember thinking, normally on road games with Ole Miss, like it's almost funny with the beat writers. we love the road games because home games, it'll take Lane half an hour to get in there. Road games, he might be in there within 2 minutes. I mean, we're like cruising. We're out of here, you know? And on this day, even though it was a really easy win or whatever, it took him a few minutes. And I thought to myself, either there's an injury that's worse than we think, or more likely, knowing Lane, he's watching this. And he came in there and he was super distracted, and he started doing his post game as that game's winding down. There was like inside the last 2 minutes. And when it ended, I mean, he made this comment about, you guys should watch this. You might never see this again in your lifetime. You know, I mean, this might never happen again or whatever. But it was just, there was something about Vanderbilt winning that game and looking at the crowd, and Diego Pavia's going crazy, and Jackson Dart by this time is in there for his post game, and he's watching Pavia celebrate, and he's like, I love that guy. That dude's a stud. He fires me up. And there was just this thing that came over me of, oh, this is like one of those super cool stories where literally it kind of unites everyone except Alabama fans, because everybody's happy for these guys, like in the people that were around it. And there was a Instagram reel or a TikTok thing with the PA announcer who's been doing Vanderbilt games forever, and his family films him doing the Vanderbilt wins, and he reads the score, Vandy wins or whatever. And I kind of caught myself like tearing up a little bit. Like it was neat. Like it was just this cool moment. And then you see the stat about Vandy was 0 for 60 or something against top 5 teams. And it was, I don't know, man. I mean, as someone who's covered the program for as long as you have, and I know you're a pro and you do your job, but was there any part of you that was like, this is wild? I mean, I can't really believe this, and you didn't even know who to talk to, maybe?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and it's a long answer, but I think it's a good one. It kind of felt like, well, first of all, like when you're in the moment, you're like, okay, you're thinking of all the stuff you've got to do and get done. And so that's kind of where your head is.
Yeah.
I mean, you are thinking those things, but I'm like, okay, I'm witnessing history. So since I'm witnessing history, what do I need to be doing? And I had to write that story for a national outlet. I had to file that at the buzzer. So that was a little bit of a distraction. And I'm missing a little bit of the stuff that's going on the field as they're running out the clock because I'm writing. And I told I've got two 20-something-year-old kids that write for me that are really good. I said, look, I don't want you to box yourself out of the press conference, but if you can go in the stands or get on the field and just turn your phones on just to get reactions to put up on YouTube, I said, do it if you can. Just to let people marinate them. And I took my camera and I recorded nearly 15 minutes of stuff. Like the last minute of game action when I had a couple of timeouts, and I'm wide angling it so people can see the sidelines. And then I kept it on until they tore the goalpost down, which that was another remarkable story too. But you're just sitting there just going, and it felt like a dream. But I think the closest thing I can compare it to was, you remember when we were kids, we watched the U.S. Olympic hockey team beat Russia?
Yeah.
And it's just this joy of, I can't believe what I've watched, and it's just so far beyond anybody's comprehension. That's kind of what it felt like. I'm getting texts from other writers and stuff, and I mean, it felt, and there's a parallel, like we're living in this time when everybody's divided and people are going at you over politics, and you're just looking at sheer unbridled joy. I mean, the students never show up to ball games for anything. You know, there were maybe 5,000 or 6,000 Vandy fans in the crowd, and half of them are students, and the students are going nuts. Like they're down at the far end, and they're not even waiting to get to the steps. They're just jumping off like a 13-foot ledge to get on the field. And I mean, there's just so much here. I remember, you know, when I was a kid, I grew up in this area, and what you had to do, this was before you had pro sports, where you had Vanderbilt sports, and you had the Nashville Sounds AAA. And boy, we didn't have a lot of money, but we went to a lot of ball games. And that's before you could see stuff on TV all the time. And I remember back in the Music City Miracle, we got Titans tickets when they were here. And I remember being at that game. They'd had such a great year. And we're sitting up in our seats in row 3 of the upper deck. And Buffalo kicks a field goal when it's cold. And my dad just looks at us and he says, guys, I've sat through too many Vanderbilt games to sit and watch the other team's fans celebrate that I'm not going to stick around for this. So Dad walks out of his seat, down the aisle and everything, has no idea what happens. And in his words, he says, I step on the shuttle bus and it sounds like the stadium has exploded. And they said, I look at the shuttle bus driver and I said, what just happened? And Dad missed it all because that was his life growing up. I mean, his dad took him to games and he was just over it. He's like, I can't take this anymore. I've got a 10-year-old boy who loves sports and likes to go to some games every now and then. So somebody called me and said, here's a couple tickets if you want them. Well, I'm not sitting in the stands. I don't even want to sit in the stands anymore.
Yeah.
And I knew my wife probably didn't want to go. It was 85 degrees but I knew my son would probably want to go. And I asked him, I didn't even ask him first because I needed to make sure I had somebody who could take him. I called my brother who used to go with us. And I could tell he didn't want any part of going. And I don't blame him. And I felt really bad. He's driving up to the stadium and he's texting me and I'd warned him. I said, John, you had better get here early and approach it from the residential side. Because Neil, I don't think you've been down near Vanderbilt since they started all the construction. I remember we met 2 years ago. That might as well be 20 years ago. It is a hot mess everywhere around the stadium. He couldn't park within a mile and a half of the stadium, and I'm just feeling awful. I'm like, I've wrangled my brother into taking my son, and John is joking with them on the way and is like, hey, buddy, you're going to be able to tell your grandkids one day that you saw Jalen Milroe throw for 500 yards. And I'm just feeling awful. I'm like, well, what if I roped my brother into?
Yeah.
And he's got to battle all this on the way out, and and that happened.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the season doesn't end. It has been interesting because, no one wants to let it go. SEC Shorts did the phenomenal job with it on Monday. I mean, it was just it was amazing. And everyone's in this story, but they got to play a Kentucky team that's pretty good Saturday that came here and beat Ole Miss and is really good on defense. Pretty sound offensively, nothing spectacular, but they kind of do everything okay. Don't know how they lost to South Carolina by 25 points, but that might just be the world we're living in. What does Clark Lee doesn't strike me as the type of guy. I mean, number one, he's an incredibly handsome man. But number two,
looks a lot like you.
I mean, just what a good looking guy. But two, he doesn't strike me as the dude that, okay, I beat Alabama, we're good. And I think he has this ego thing about him that I've said this many times, Chris. I had a lot of respect for what he did at the end of last season when they had an abysmal year. They were bad. And at the end of that year, instead of him kind of, not out loud, but sort of subtly going, you can't do it here. There's no money. There's no NIL. We're competing in this ridiculously difficult league that's getting more ridiculously difficult with Texas and Oklahoma joining. The stadiums are not done. Nothing's done. You know what? I'm going to get my check, and I'll finish the gig, and I'll go be a DC somewhere and try this again somewhere else. Instead, he was like, nope, we're going to reevaluate everything we do from the top down, starting with me, and kind of made some changes, brought in Jerry Kill, did all those things. And I just had a lot of respect for that because it's hard to look in the mirror and go, no, some of this is on me. And so, I mean, long-winded question here. I mean, they're going to go to Lexington looking for a dub, right? I mean, they're a different. Everyone's trying to make them sweet, lovable, cute Vandy, and I don't think that's what Clark Lee wants.
No, he doesn't. And here's the other little backstory. You led with the story of C.J. Taylor basically saying, "Hey, we're going to win," and he actually, in the whole interview, he doubled down on that a couple times. And I've seen, look, like every now and then they don't usually get one like this, but every once in a blue moon they pull one like this, and everybody goes, "Oh." Is this the time they turn the corner? And almost never, other than 2 years of James Franklin. And you might not want to know what went into that. They don't, it just doesn't turn it in. And Clark Lee is just I think the longer we do this, we kind of root for people. And he's a guy that I root for. Like we've covered coaches we liked, and we covered coaches. It's part of my language. We wouldn't piss on if they were on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a good guy. And I used to sit.
No, I really
back when
I like Vandy, and I tell people we joke about how I look like him or whatever, stuff like that. But I've met Clark a few times, and I just like the guy. I mean, I like the person, and I think he's kind of made of the right stuff, right? I mean, here's this guy that probably should have gotten the Notre Dame gig when it was going to open up. Someone probably should have said, "Hey, hang tight, you're going to get this gig." And he didn't. He went to Vandy. He's got some home roots. There's some stuff there, and a lot of people will tell you don't take those jobs because the emotion that you have for a place will dissipate when you become part of the sausage machine.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of truth to that. Trust me. He did it anyway, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's just, there's a lot there. But yeah, to your point, I think a lot of people do cheer for him. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, no, it's okay. And this is a whining answer to your question, but I think it's an interesting one. It's fired my dog up apparently. But I used to, when he was a walk-on fullback, I had just started doing this. And I used to sit at practice. I'd be the only one there. I'd only be the only media guy. This is back before nobody had restrictions to practice, and Vanderbilt still doesn't really. We can cover whatever we want thanks to him. But I used to sit over and watch practice with his dad, who's a physician in town, and actually was the trainer for the Nashville Sounds, and just the nicest, gentlest, kindest, meekest guy you could be around. And so you can tell the qualities, came from there. And he always greets me when I see him at practice. That's just kind of who they are. And I walk in the room, to get to the press conference, it's a mess. They got construction blocked off everywhere. You got, all kinds of people on the field. I'm like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to even get down there. And I'm blocked off. I can't go through my normal route. Somebody lets me into a part of the building, and I have the press conference across the street in McGugin Center, the athletic building.
Yeah.
And I'm having to go through hallways I didn't even know existed to try to get to where the press conference is. And I'm walking through the coaches' offices, and there's families there and kids there, and nobody's jumping up and down and screaming. I mean, there's smiles and stuff, but nobody's losing their mind. I'm expecting I'm going to hear cheers erupting from some corner of the building somewhere. I'm expecting I'm going to be late. I end up being 30 minutes early. And we're just all sitting there. Just keep waiting for this eruption or this jubilation that we never hear. And I see Clark's dad, and he said, I'm kind of still in shock. And then Clark walks into the room, and he tears up a little bit. You can watch the press conference. But nowhere is this jubilation. I'm just thinking these people are all in shock that this happened. But you listen to him talk, and I thought back to the Taylor interview the next day. I was like, I don't know if it was they were in shock. Several of them said after the game they honestly expected to win. And as nutty as that sounds, it kind of felt like that when you walk through the building, which is just another layer of the cake of strangeness we saw.
No, it not really, because I remember you gave me the ride to the Ole Miss Vanderbilt game in 2022 at Vandy, and it was a good first half. I think Vandy even led at one point early third quarter, and then Ole Miss just popped them. And I did the Ole Miss stuff, and then I went across the street to find you. And when I went across the street, some of the Vandy kids were out. They were finished, and they were getting ready to meeting girlfriends and parents and stuff. I remember being really impressed with their mindset, the way they talked, and you could tell there was a culture kind of thing that was happening there. You could feel it. You could see it. And I mean, I've been around this long enough. You can tell when sometimes you cover teams that are shitty.
Yeah.
when they get beat, they don't care. They just don't care. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever. I'm here. I'm required to be here. I played. My team got its ass kicked. I don't really care. Where's the party? Let's go get something to eat. Whatever. Normal. I'm not criticizing. It just happens. It happens all the time. That was different. They weren't upset that they got beat by Ole Miss. And they were getting ready to go to Georgia the next week where they knew they were going to probably get pummeled, and they did. But I remember some of the younger guys just sort of talking about, hey, this is just part of the process that we're in. It's going to take a minute. The teams we're playing right now are more talented than us. They're deeper than us. It's going to take some time. And you'd hear it, and you're like, you're Vanderbilt. You're never going to get there. But there was a different culture kind of that was happening. And so when something like this season has happened, where obviously they went out and got a quarterback, went out and got a quarterback, and Clark's handled the defense, and they're better on both sides of the field. And in today's college football, I think there's more parity than ever, and maybe there's not as much margin, and boom, there they are. So here's my question. Is there any chance? I mean, I know the odds makers don't give them much of a chance, but any chance they go to Kentucky and build on this, or is this a hungover team that kind of gets popped by a fresh Kentucky team?
Well, before I answer your question, there was a little bit more to unpack, I think, of how incredible this is. He came in and thought, we're going to build a program and get guys to stay 4 and 5 years and redshirt them and clean out the old culture that was bad. And he'd kind of done that. And then the problem is all hell breaks loose with the portal and NIL, and they don't have a plan. And he's thinking, I don't know who these kids are that are in the portal. I know my guys. I know the culture I built, and I'm going to ride with that. And then they just got destroyed last year. So he has to go back and try to rebuild that culture with complete strangers, and that's really hard to do. And especially at Vandy, where you can't get kids in school left and right like you can. Now, I think they have definitely relaxed some rules, because if you told me that they could get a kid who spent his first 2 years in JUCO and then went to New Mexico State, and I think I don't know if he's got his degree from New Mexico State or what, but like they kind of created some kind of special thing where he's got to go to class, but it's not like they bent some rules and things to get him in. And boy, how smart of a move was that? So that's the thing these had to put together. Look, I mean, the odds are they go up to Kentucky and get beat, right? They're going to be underdogs in every single game they got left other than Ball State. Now, they won't be big underdogs against South Carolina. They won't be big underdogs against Auburn. And I was a little surprised that Kentucky was 14. I thought it might be more like 7-10. Mm-hmm. I mean, you saw those guys play. That is a big boy defensive line starting with Deion Walker. They got dudes on the edge that are like 5th and 6th year guys, I think, that are really good. They got a stud corner. They got some – I mean, it is a tough matchup. I think Alabama's got obviously a lot of talent on defense. Kentucky will be the best defense they've faced so far. I mean, if we're – put the feel-good stuff aside, if we're just talking, football and who's going to win, I think Kentucky will beat them. But, man – they are so hard to stop with that scheme, and you don't ever see it. And like every time they have an opening for a football coach, everybody says, well, they should go get somebody who runs a triple option. And I get it. The criticism is the SEC will catch up with it after a while. And then the other thing is, like, when that goes bad, you get to bring in the next coach with a bunch of triple option players. So rebuild becomes tougher. But, man, what they did, they got the closest thing they could get to that without going there. And I think throw out all the numbers, throw out a lot of the analysis, because they bring something that is just really a nightmare to try to stop. And when they don't turn the ball over, and again, they've only done that once all year, I mean, you just never know what could happen. I never thought in a million years they beat Virginia Tech and Alabama, but here we are.
Yeah, Virginia Tech, Alabama, should have beaten Missouri. It's crazy. It's kind of cool, though. And it leads into my next question. You not only cover Vanderbilt, you keep up with the whole league for Southeastern 14. I mean, hours after Vanderbilt finishes off Alabama, Arkansas knocks off Tennessee. Kentucky came to Ole Miss and won a week ago. South Carolina beat Kentucky by 25 points. Ole Miss just whipped South Carolina. This thing is like really unpredictable right now. I mean, I don't even more so than ever before. Like Arkansas, Texas A&M. Arkansas led in the fourth quarter, and then Texas A&M just beats the brakes off Missouri. Man, I don't have any idea. I mean, like I genuinely don't. I go back and almost laugh at Hugh Freeze when they lost to Arkansas, and he did the whole thing about, if we played them 10 times, we'd beat them. I'm like, dude, in this league, I don't know that anybody could beat anybody 10 times. What do you, outside of Mississippi State, who's obviously in year one of a big rebuild? I mean, it's nutty. Do you have any rhyme or reason on what you think's happening around the league?
Well, look, I mean, if you had power ranked all the teams preseason, Alabama would have been anywhere from 1 to 3, and Vanderbilt would have been everybody's 16, except for maybe Mississippi State. I mean, when is the last time we went to a year and before we even got to the middle of October, the worst team had beaten the best team? These are times we've never seen. I've said this for a while. I think this is kind of like it's becoming NFL-like parity in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's what Lane said.
But with it's like the NFL combined with, I don't know, the drama of professional wrestling or something like that. It's just as I think we are. And I don't like the way the sausage is made. I don't like all the stuff that goes on. They need rules and regulations, and hopefully we get there. But Neil, what it has done is it's made for an amazing game. I mean, you go back to last year, Georgia was, the top team, and this is another reason I think that the playoff system is great. The number one team in the rankings, they've been number one for a while, doesn't make the playoff. And the week before that, Ohio State had been number one. And neither of those teams make the playoff. And you have 4 other teams. And the games were fairly interesting. And, look at I mean, if you start naming who could win a national title this year, Neil, it might be 8 or 9 teams. I don't know who the favorite is. I mean, it feels like it's Texas, but I don't know. Texas hasn't played
anybody.
Alabama or Georgia or Ole Miss or
they played anybody. They've played right. They went to Michigan and played an average Michigan team. They beat Mississippi State. That's what they've done.
Yeah, and then throw on top of this, you've got all these teams that have new teams. These guys have never played together before. Like how many? I wonder if the playoff's going to be won by somebody that loses 3 games. That it all just comes together late in the year when their guys get used to playing with each other.
Like the Mets or the Tigers get hot in baseball at the end, and you're like, well, maybe it's like that's what I've all week long. I asked Lane about it on Sunday night, and you could tell I've covered Lane long enough now to know that if he hasn't thought about something, you don't get a real good answer, and then literally you can tell that I probably provoked a thought because he's kind of started referencing it the next day, which was not good for me, but I get it. We all assumed back at media days, when we all hang out in that bubble like Matt Moscona calls it, we just all assumed that, 4, 5, 6 SEC teams would make it because there'd be, a couple, maybe a 12-0, a couple of 11-1s, a bunch of 10-2s. Chris, I'm not sure how many people are going to end up with 2 or fewer losses. I mean, there's a world where there's a whole bunch of 3-loss teams. Maybe there's one team at the top, right, where that goes 11-1, or maybe it's Texas. I bet it's not. I'm just going to tell you, I bet it's not. But maybe it's Texas. And they go 11-1, 12-0, and they're in. But like Georgia still has to play Texas. They still have to play Ole Miss. One of the teams that's kind of sneaky in it right now that nobody's talking about is A&M because their schedule's kind of doable. Yet A&M barely beat Arkansas, and yet Arkansas, you could say Arkansas is this close to being 5-1, 6-0 right now. Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
I mean, if Vanderbilt had beaten Georgia State, which they almost did, and then won the overtime, if Vanderbilt were 6-0 today, what's Vanderbilt ranked? Well, are we talking about
top 10?
Yeah, are we talking about Vanderbilt as a playoff team? I mean, I realize all these things sound nutty, but yet here kind of here we are. Like you know, I mean, I think you and I've talked about this. It's one of my media things. It's like my media pet peeve is that we establish a narrative in the preseason and we stick to it. We're rigid. Like, nope, we're going to make everything fit this narrative. And we're one more crazy weekend away from stuff doesn't fit the narrative. Like, Ole Miss plays in Baton Rouge on Saturday night, and I think it's an awfully important game from a playoff standpoint. But 2 weeks ago, if you had told me, okay, Ole Miss loses to Kentucky and then they lose to LSU, I'm going to probably write the obituary. And now I might hint at the obituary, but I'm not sure I'll write it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you know, because Georgia doesn't look unbeatable. Nobody looks unbeatable. And the only team that you look at and go, they suck, is State. That's it. That's the only team that you look at and go, they can't win games. Even like as much as I love to make fun of Auburn because I don't like certain people there and stuff. I mean, Auburn's talented. They do some things. And if they could ever have a game where the quarterback doesn't throw a bunch of picks, they could beat people. They had Oklahoma beat, you know. They had Arkansas on the ropes. If you told me that Auburn won a couple of games down the stretch, I'm not shocked.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a world where, call me crazy, Indiana could be in the playoffs and Georgia and Alabama could be on the outside looking in, which, like, who would have ever thought that in the 12-team playoff era? But I just think that's what we are. I think it's a completely different world. I think, again, I'll go back to roster composition and not playing together. I go back to teams, you know, kids having one foot out the door for whatever reason. I mean, it's just, it makes for a great product. I don't like how it's been made. But and a little secret, and you'll agree, we in the media, we're not, you know, these gifted genius people just by the virtue of our seats. Yeah, we may know a little bit more about how the sausage is made, but I don't know that I'm any better at telling you what's going to happen next than half the people listening to this show. Now, I can dig in and give you angles and stuff, but when it comes to picking games, I don't know what's going to happen. But to me, that's a lot of fun, Neil. It's a whole lot more fun when we get to this point in the season and I make the statement I just made about Indiana, Georgia, and Alabama, because we're usually at this point where we're going, okay, are we taking Alabama or the field? Are we taking Georgia or the field? And that's the only interesting discussion we have. To me, this is a whole lot better.
Yeah, and now the answer would be, give me the field. And back then,
give me the field against anybody. Yeah,
literally anyone. I mean, so the Big Ten doesn't appear to be as strong as the SEC. At the end of the day, I'm asking you to look ahead a couple months. At the end of the day, does the strength of the SEC factor in, or does the committee just look at numbers and go, nope, 10-2, and the Big Ten's better than 9-3 in the SEC?
Man, I don't know. I feel like, and this is where it's going to get very interesting, okay? In football, we look hard at the number to the right of the dash. Mm-hmm. How many games you lost. And that is like, you look at the poll and it's like, okay, here's the undefeated team. Here's the 1-loss teams. Here's the 2-loss teams. Here's the 3-loss teams. And, you know, like, I remember one year that Ole Miss, I thought like a 7-5 Ole Miss team was probably deserving to be ranked. I don't know if they even got votes. Because if you looked at their schedule, it was one of Hugh Freeze's early teams, and they had played a murderous schedule. But like when we do polls, that's kind of the way it goes. And here's what I'm getting at. In basketball, like, there used to be this thing like if you won 20 games or did this in your conference, you get in the tournament. And now we're looking at, well, what's somebody's Ken Pomeroy rating? You know, they might have gone 19-13, but they were top 30 in Ken Pom. And all these things that nobody thought of 10 years ago in basketball that are analytically driven. My question I have is, does football go that way? Do they look at it and say, well, you know, Tennessee was 9-3, but you look at the analytics, they're a top 10 team in the computers. They average 3 more yards per play or whatever, and all these metrics that tell you how good a team should be.
Yeah, quality. And do they dive in and then you start looking at who the losses were, and that's why I told Ole Miss people when they lost to Kentucky, I said, listen, you need to become big time Kentucky fans now. You need that. You need that loss to be pretty.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not even just that. It's not just resume, but like if you, okay, forget who's beat who. If you're trying to decide between, I don't know, Notre Dame and Notre Dame and A&M is a bad comp because they played, but I don't know, humor me. You're trying to decide between Oregon and Ole Miss for the last at-large bid, which, do you say, all right, if we put these guys on a neutral field, Ole Miss would be a touchdown favorite. And even though Oregon lost one fewer game, and played a comparable schedule or whatever the metrics are, we're going to put Ole Miss in just because we think they're better. See, that to me is the wild card because I don't know how the committee's going to think through it.
I'm exactly the same as you. It's why I get some of these questions like in mailbag stuff, and my honest answer is I don't know. Like it's first year, and so you don't know how the committee's going to look at anything. I mean, there's an assumption that they'll do this or they'll do this, but you don't know because, like with the basketball committee, it's very predictable. Because you have all these metrics and you can look at it and go, well, in the past, a team with this resume gets in 9 out of 10 times. Whatever. You don't have that in football anymore. It's the first time we've done 12 teams. All you know for sure is the 4 conference champs are getting in. And then after that, it's kind of, you don't really know. I mean, what if you have a hodgepodge of teams that basically have the same record? How do you separate them? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether they're going to be sticklers like in baseball where the committee's like damn determined to grow the game and all that stuff, and they're going to move people around. And in basketball, for a while, they were real hung up on get the mid-majors in, and now they're hung up on, let's make sure we have the proper representation from the big leagues. I don't know how they'll do it in football. I don't know whether 10-2, 9-3 Ole Miss in that world where let's say their losses are, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Georgia. Just I can almost hear people go, "Hey, losing Oklahoma." That's not the point. Do they look at it and go, "Well, in that world, you lost 3 home games." Like, that's a negative. Would you be better off if you're Ole Miss, would you be better off losing at LSU than you would be losing at home to Oklahoma? I don't know. I don't know how they're going to look at all those things. Do you rank strength of leagues? Do you go, the SEC is metrically better than the Big Ten? Or it's going to be interesting. And you throw in a couple more weekends like last weekend, I mean, I think it's just a total crapshoot at that point.
I don't think any of us had us exiting week 6 with one unbeaten SEC team. I mean, if you'd said that before the season, people have said you've lost your mind. But this is what I think would be fun, Neil. I think it'd be awesome if we get to the day of selection, we're all watching, and like in basketball now, we kind of know how it's going to go.
Yeah,
like you can kind of name 66 of the 68 teams in without much trouble. Then it's like, all right, we got these 5 teams on the board, who they're going to take. And every now and then they throw in a team that nobody had in, but basically we know what it's going to look like. I mean, we could get to this thing and it could be like, all right, here's your 4 automatic qualifiers. Here's your, 4 teams we feel like are getting in. Say Georgia loses to Texas and goes 10-2. We know they'll be in at large, but you might have 9 teams for 4 spots. And I think that'd be a lot of fun. And I think the thing that it would also do, which I think we're headed there anyway, and I can't wait, and I feel sorry for the little guys, but I just keep thinking the dynamics one day are going to push out all these Ole Miss and Furman games because there's too much money to be made for Ole Miss to play Clemson or Oregon instead. And I think that, to me, I wonder if that will have a little bit of a nudge on all that when we're all said and done.
I think so too. All right, last 2 minutes I've got with you. Give me your quick, just initial instinct pick on these games. Texas, Oklahoma.
Texas, because I need to see Oklahoma move the ball more.
All right. Ole Miss goes to LSU.
I took Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is the most complete team on both sides of the ball. I think both of them can move the ball. I think Ole Miss has a stout defense. I don't know what LSU has.
Any chance South Carolina bounces back, or does Alabama just take out a revenge game?
Beamer's pulled some magic every now and then, but I think in Tuscaloosa with a coach that'll probably have gotten their attention, I think that's a that's a tough hill to climb.
Trying to see who I've left off here. Florida, Tennessee.
I'm taking Tennessee, man, but they couldn't throw the ball downfield last week, and Florida's been a little sneaky good of late. And you know how that series goes. Florida has beaten them when nobody thought Florida was beating them, but that one's in Knoxville. I think that'll be the difference.
Yeah, Florida's interesting to me because the last couple of weeks they've looked like they have a pulse, and Tennessee's not good on offense right now. I mean, that's 2 weeks in a row against decent defenses, Oklahoma, Arkansas, that they couldn't generate much offense. Now, Florida's not that good on defense, so maybe they can kind of get it rolling a little bit, but should be interesting. Hey, Chris, as always, man, thanks so much for the time. Can't wait to visit with you again.
Yeah, always fun to join you. Have a great week. And if there's anybody listening in hurricane territory, God bless you. You're my prayers, and let's hope that's not part of the weekend storyline.
Amen. Thank you, bud. Ben Mintz, Barstool Sports, joins, as he always does each and every week, for MPW Digital Extra. Ben, welcome into the show. I know that this is because of where you're from and some of your friendships and your professional background. I know this is a special week for you.
It always is. Going back to the year 2000, my senior year of high school, this is the 22nd Ole Miss-LSU game in 25 years I've made. I grew up, a mutt in this rivalry. My dad went to LSU. My mom went to Ole Miss Law School, and it's the Mississippi side of my family. I couldn't figure out where I was going to college between these schools till like June after I graduated my senior year of high school, and worked for ESPN Baton Rouge. And so, this is the Super Bowl for me every year. It's 90% of my relationships in life in these two schools. And I can't wait to get down there Saturday night. I think we got a barn burner on our hands, and LSU celebrating 100 years of Death Valley this weekend. That's not nothing, that's for sure.
I'm trying to think the first time I set foot in that stadium, and I'm a Louisiana boy too. My grandfather, who died when I was a very little boy, one of the only things I remember from him is he gave me this stuffed LSU football that I still have. It's looking right at it. It's always kind of a mythical place to me. I grew up in North Louisiana, as you did, and we didn't have any family ties to LSU at all. It was never a school that I considered. Looking back, I should have. I didn't, because I just didn't. I always thought LSU was going to be too big, But I remember a couple things about it. I guess the summer after my junior year of high school. Yeah, I guess this is right. I went to Boys State. I was nominated for Boys State, and that was in Baton Rouge, and you stayed on the LSU campus. It was my first time, I think, to ever be on the campus. Maybe I'd been to it before, but I'd never really seen it. And it was the first time I really noticed it, and I remember liking the campus. That was a great experience. And then that fall, both of my parents have degrees from Alabama, and that fall, and I grew up an Alabama fan, and that fall we went to Tiger Stadium. Alabama played LSU, and it was a great game. Alabama won. It was a lot of fun. But it was my first game at Tiger Stadium, and I can remember thinking, this place is so cool. It's so, it's big and it's intimidating, and yet it's a festival. And I know this is an Ole Miss crowd listening to this, and they probably don't want to hear this, but it has always been like my favorite place to just go see a football game. I love their pregame. There's just a lot of stuff about it. And again, I don't know what that is. I don't know whether it's just the Louisiana roots in me, or whether there's something about it that resonates with me. I don't know. But it's one of the very few places where I like to go, and I'll get to my seat. I mean, I'll go super early and I'll work and all that stuff, but I'll actually pay attention to the pregame. I usually don't pay any attention at all to a lot of the pregame stuff on the field. I couldn't tell you what South Carolina did last week. I have no idea. I know they did the sandstorm thing and all that, the entrance and stuff, but you know what I mean? Like the pregame music and stuff. I have no idea played. No.
Yeah, it is what it is. Their band's unbelievable. I mean, they're literally unbelievable. And their pregame and the Hey Fighting Tigers and all that. It's a supercharged atmosphere. And as it's evolved through the years, it's gotten to where it's just special for the Saturday night big SEC games now. Like, they're non-conference games. It's not the same. It's these they usually have like 2 or 3 of them a year where you get the Saturday night SEC game against a real opponent, and it just gets turned all the way up in there. And that's exactly what this is going to be Saturday night. The weather report looks really, really good this week. I'm going to do the all-day deal. I'm getting out there at like 10:30 or 11, and I got 4 or 5 tailgates to hit. And I'm super excited. I think I got a pregame field pass lined up too. And, it's exciting, and it's going to be a heck of a game. There's a lot to break down on this front. I do think Ole Miss is a better football team this year. And let me be abundantly clear. I want to gut them. Just because I'm from Louisiana, I want LSU's heart on a plate this week. There'd be nothing more fun to me than beating them on their 100-year anniversary of Death Valley game, a rivalry game. But just excited about the pageantry of it all. It's it's gonna be really cool.
All right, let's talk about the game. I agree with you. I think Ole Miss is a better football team. Vegas agrees that Ole Miss is a better football team. Ole Miss is about a 3.5 point favorite on the road, which means Vegas thinks Ole Miss is better by about a touchdown. But there are some issues for Ole Miss that they have to account for. This is the best quarterback that they've seen all season. The Nussmeier slander is something I don't understand, but it's fine. I don't care. I don't know the Nussmeiers, Garrett, and I wouldn't know Garrett if he walked in the door. So this isn't defending Garrett Nussmeier. I just talked to some NFL people. I've watched him play. He's got a live arm. There's a lot of skill set there. He's the best quarterback Ole Miss has played this season, period. That crowd does get loud. It can impact your offense. It will impact your communication. It can make you lose your poise. I've seen teams lose their poise there. It's challenging. Now, on the other side, LSU's not good on defense at all. They're better than they were a year ago. That says very little because they were god-awful a year ago. They're just a little better now. They're good up front on their offensive line. Their offensive line versus Ole Miss's defensive line is going to be very interesting. They're susceptible in the secondary, but Ole Miss is going to have to throw the football better than it has the last couple of weeks. Jackson Dart has not been great in SEC play. So there are some matchup issues inside the game that make this pretty damned interesting.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, a few of the points that they hit on that I agree with. I think, look, Ole Miss's front seven is really good this year. The improvement, it's impossible not to notice. With Walter Nolan and Pegues and Ivy and Chris Paul and Perkins. Huge improvement. However, the point you made that has me concerned is in 6 weeks, has Ole Miss played one quarterback that's even marginally competent yet? At all.
I thought Vandegrift was solid.
No, he improved. He improved a lot after South Carolina.
I thought he played well. I did. Now, he was not great, but he did what they asked him to do pretty effectively, and he did make a few plays with his feet, and he did make a few throws. That last throw was a brilliant throw. The one to Brown to set up the touchdown was a big time throw now.
Well, when I look at this, so LSU with Will Campbell, who could be a top 3 pick in the draft at left tackle, and they've got a stud right tackle. Their run blocking hadn't been elite, and LSU really doesn't have that good of a running game. They've been playing musical chairs at running back, and the one that's emerged is Caden Durham, the freshman, but he dislocated 2 of his toes against South Alabama last week, so I don't know really what to expect. And I'm actually very close friends with LSU's offensive coordinator, Joe Sloan, another Rustin tie. He was at Louisiana Tech for 6 years during the Holtz era, and I used to cover his games. And I'm actually excited. We're going to take a picture on the field pregame together, just kind of the journey when I used to cover him. But I expect LSU to come out and just chunk the ball in this game because Trey Amos is a really good corner for Ole Miss. I think the other guys in the secondary are talented, but they're, I would say, haven't been tested yet. And when you look at this LSU receiving core, they don't have a Neighbors or a Brian Thomas this year, but they got 4 or 5 good dudes. Aaron Anderson, the Bama transfer, is good. Kyron Lacey's pretty good. Xavier Thomas. They also have got C.J. Daniels, the Liberty transfer. They've got a good tight end in Mason Taylor. And so they got a lot of guys they can go to. And I think they're going to chunk it in this game. And on the Ole Miss side of it, I think Ole Miss's offense is going to go up and down the field. Because we saw it in this game last year. LSU, you think of LSU's defenses through the years and all the talent They got one guy that's going to play in the NFL on that defense right now. It's number 4, Swinson, the young pass rusher. With Harold Perkins out, their D-line's weak this year. Their secondary's weak this year. Ole Miss is going to go up and down the field, and LSU's going to struggle with Ole Miss's tempo. Expect a couple coverage busts. I think Paris is going to break some long runs. And in the vein and tradition of this game, I don't think we're looking at 55-49 again. I mean, last year, that was crazy, but I do think we're looking at like 38-35 or 41-38 here.
So
I think
like
this thing
over.
Oh, I love the over. I think if you were playing pool, when you're playing pool, you're setting up your next shot.
I gotta tell you, if you tell me ahead of this game that LSU gets into the mid to upper 30s, I think that's a really bad sign for Ole Miss.
Well, my thing on this game is LSU Ole Miss games, when you go back through the history of these games fly off the rails like crazy. They always do. I mean, there's shootouts. Remember 55-50 in 2020, last year 55-49. These games get nuts. And I think the Ole Miss side of it, people aren't seeing this over because the last 2 games have been 2017 and 27-3. And so I think it's got people off the smell.
I don't know, man. I mean, look, Dart's like, I don't remember the exact number. It's not good. His passing numbers, his efficiency against Kentucky and South Carolina, and some of that's been the drops and stuff. I get it. But he's not been super. I mean, this has not been offensively, they have not been a well-oiled machine in 2 SEC games. They've not held up great on the offensive front. And LSU doesn't have the defensive line that either Kentucky or South Carolina have, but I don't know, man. I mean, listen, you're better at this than I am. I don't love that over. I don't love it at all.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe it could, maybe 34-31-ish, but I think it's going to get pretty wild because I think Ole Miss is going to be able to run the ball, and the tempo Ole Miss uses is going to cause problems. Some other stuff to look out for on the Ole Miss side, I think look out for Jackson Dart to run more in this game. This is a game, you got a bye week next week. When you look at how much this game means to Ole Miss season, you can erase the Kentucky loss with a win here. You win this game, you get to the bye at 6-1, you got everything in front of you. I mean, everything's on the line for the season on Saturday. A loss here, you have to win out and get help if you want to make the playoffs. I mean, it's a near-death blow. And so I would look for Jackson Dart to run more because of that. I think Henry Parrish, if he's healthy enough, could have a really big game. I mean, LSU's defense sucks. Look, they're bad. And I think, a lot of talk about Trey Harris. Hopefully he can go. But I feel like Ole Miss is going to be fine on the offensive end in this game. I really do. And I also think LSU will have a couple coverage busts. I'm kind of feeling the random Caden Lee breakout here. I think he might catch a long touchdown in this game.
So what I hear is that you kind of like Ole Miss minus the 3.5 and you love the over.
Yeah, I'm going over. I'm not, man, I can't look. I say it all the time on the show. You don't see me take road favorites much. This being the 100-year Death Valley and the road thing, I just hope Ole Miss, I don't care if they win by 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter. Just get out of here with the win. Get this win to get to 6-1 and get everything in front of you and get rest up on the bye. I'm not betting a cent on either side. Obviously I never bet against Ole Miss. It's the principal thing. But I'm not laying 3.5 here on the road in Death Valley on Saturday night. LSU's also off a bye. And but I am going to take the over is where I'm at.
Yeah, this is where my lack of any allegiance and stuff, the sentimental part doesn't exist for me, honestly. And so I look at the whole 100-year thing, and Ole Miss hasn't won there since 2008 and all that, and I'm like, none of that means a damn thing. Like, to me, it just means nothing. And I know other people disagree with that vehemently. I just think Ole Miss is better than them. At the end of the day, I think Ole Miss is better than them. I've covered LSU games where the better team was on the other sideline and they flirted with the fire too long, and then the game got rowdy, and LSU did LSU things. But usually those teams didn't have elite defensive lines. Ole Miss has an elite defensive line, and it is the difference for this team. It's not player-led meetings. It's none of the other bullshit, frankly. It's that they are elite up front on defense. And when you are elite up front on defense, you are in every game. Nobody can just put you away. Now, if they had some run of injuries up front on defense, I'd sing a different tune. But their ability to get after the quarterback, to stop the run, and they're holding opponents like 1.6 yards per rush. I mean, that's a dominant number. And that's why I like them. It's nothing else.
I'm not worried about LSU's running game at all. Their running game's been weak this year. I think
so you're going to get them in 3rd and long. And 3rd and long, when they went 3rd and long against South Carolina got to them a good bit. I think Nussmeier's really good. I think he's going to make some throws. I think they're going to hit some explosives. But I also think if they can't run the football and they get into a lot of 2nd and long, 3rd and long, this defensive line is going to force a couple of mistakes. And I don't think they can afford to give away possessions. That's why if you told me, the more I think about it, and I'm assuming Harris plays, if you told me the more that I think about it, that someone runs away with this, I'm like, Ole Miss runs away with it.
I definitely hope you're right because, like I said, we all know how much is at stake in this game. And the Harris injury thing, look, if he can walk, he's going to play. He's from Lafayette. If you grow up in Louisiana, whether you play for LSU or play against them, the specter of being in an LSU game growing up around it is, I mean, he's going to play if he can.
Well, the question with Trey is how effective can he be? And if you get to a point where you can't be effective or you don't feel right, he does have to start thinking about his professional future. I mean, so everything I hear is he's going to play and he's okay. So that's what I hear. But
good. Well, yeah, just super excited for it. And like I said, anybody that sees me, on LSU's campus, please say hello this week.
All right, let's roll through some other games. Don't have a ton of time. Appreciate yours as always. We get to some SEC kind of related games. Then when we get done, if there's a game or two that you love elsewhere, let me know. South Carolina getting 21 at Alabama. Carolina did not look good against Ole Miss. Alabama got beat in Nashville by Vanderbilt. What do you look for here?
I mean, you got to think Bama's going to come out angry and pissed off. That's 21 is just so many points. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm probably just going to stay away from this. I don't trust South Carolina on the road at Bama. If I think Bama, we've seen their secondary get exposed the last 2 weeks by the Georgia comeback and Diego Pavia. But, we saw last week in the Ole Miss-South Carolina game, their passing game is not very good.
It's horrible.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good spot for South Carolina. I'm not laying 3 touchdowns, but I would lean Bama.
Missouri coming off that disappointment, they laying 27.5 at
next.
Tell you one that I kind of like. I don't hate Army laying 26.5 against UAB at home.
Yeah, the UAB thing. I know we always touch on the Monroe ties. All-time blunder, getting rid of Bryant Vincent, who was the interim coach for Trent Dilfer. And now look what he's done at ULM, beating James Madison last week and crushing UAB. Tulane hung 70 on UAB's home field last year. It's time for Trent Dilfer to go back to being an analyst or back to the high school sideline because it ain't working.
Texas and Oklahoma get together for the first time as SEC members. They do it in Dallas like they always do at the Cotton Bowl. The Horns are 14-point favorite.
This is one of those games where you like everything about Texas except that it's a rivalry game. I mean, everything else stacks up. Quinn Ewers will be back. Oklahoma's starting Hawkins, the freshman who can move a little bit, but they're really not very good. I would lean Texas if anyone, but then if I take Texas and it's a close rivalry game like it is all the time, I'm like, what am I doing? So I'm kind of leaning toward just sitting back on this one too. But I do have some strong opinions. I promise I'm not waffling. We got some
got an interesting Big Ten game. Penn State hits the road to go to USC. This is at 2:30. The Nittany Lions a 5.5-point road favorite in the Coliseum.
We have hit on one I love. I love USC here as a home dog, catching 5.5. Yeah, well, last week USC lost at Minnesota in a game that had 30-mile-an-hour winds. And you look at this new look ACC. The road travel is murder on these schools. You're having to do all this cross-country stuff. And I've always been a big fan of when a team loses a road favorite and they're home underdog the next week. That's a spot I'm looking for. It's a gambling trend I've been following forever. We've been talking about it on this the last few years. USC loses outright in Minnesota. They're in a bounce-back spot. I don't trust Penn State's offense. I mean, they played a 34-27 game with Bowling Green. They beat UCLA 27-11. They're like ranked number 4. I'm not buying it at all. I think USC wins this game outright. And I like the money line and +5. It's one of my biggest plays of the week.
Okay, interesting. I'm just kind of skipping around. I'm looking for games that are interesting.
I've got a couple. I'll tell you my other couple real big ones just on the end. One of my biggest plays this week is a random one. I absolutely love Pitt -3 at home against Cal.
Yeah.
Cal blew that 35-10 lead with College game day there last week at like midnight on Saturday and their biggest day ever. And now you got to travel cross country to play Pitt at 11 a.m. And this Pitt squad is hot. Eli Holstein, the 5-star Bama quarterback transfer from Lafayette from St. Thomas More, he's throwing for over 303 TDs every week. He's cooking. You know, the line only being 3 does seem a little low, but keep in mind Cal easily covered as a 10.5-point underdog against Miami. I think Pitt wins this game by 2 touchdowns plus.
Interesting. Georgia laying 34. I don't hate Mississippi State plus the 34 here. With Georgia got Texas next week. Georgia's got bigger fish to fry, if you will. I mean, I don't know how much energy do they spend beating Mississippi State by 50.
It doesn't seem like Georgia's like that interested in covering big numbers often either. So I mean, I guess I'd lean State if anyone, but but not strong opinion.
Florida at Tennessee. The Gators had a nice performance against UCF. That's 2 decent performances in a row. They go to Knoxville to play a Tennessee team that just lost in Fayetteville. Tennessee struggles offensively to score a lot of points. 15.5 is the line.
Yeah, I like Florida here. That's too many points. I mean, you're looking at a rivalry game, and you look at this rivalry through the years. Tennessee always plays bad against Florida. I know they beat them 2 years ago at home. They lost in the Swamp last year. For whatever reason, they always struggle in the spot. 15.5 is a ton of points. I mean, I get that Tennessee's in a bounce-back spot, but, like, this is an SEC rivalry game. You're getting 15.5. I mean, give me the Gators here. I think they're playing a little better, too. I really do.
I do, too. The other big game, I mean, the 2 big national games at night, Ole Miss-LSU, and the other one's Ohio State at Oregon. This line's right at 3 right now. The Buckeyes are road favorite in Eugene.
Yeah, I slightly lean Oregon, but like not a strong opinion. 3, it's always a weird place to go travel and play. They're catching the 3. Ohio State has had a lot of slow starts this year. They're extremely talented, but I don't know whatever reason. I mean, I feel like I keep looking up and it's 8 minutes left in the second quarter and it's 7-0. And they're going to have to do something about that in this game. Oregon's also got an elite defensive line. You just talked about that with Ole Miss. Oregon's is really good too. And I think they can keep them in the game. Dylan Gabriel can make some plays. And so, look, I'm not saying I love Oregon, but in the spot, I'd lean them as a 3-point dog, home dog.
Why is Kentucky a 13.5-point favorite over Vanderbilt? Am I missing something?
This one, there's a lot to be said on this one. My instincts are really going off on under 46.5 here. Kentucky, the 2017 game against Ole Miss, the 13-12 game against Georgia, they've got a really strong front 7. I know Vandy lit it up against Bama, and everybody realizes that. But, man, this is a weird spot this week against that Kentucky really stout defense. I'm not sure. I mean, you're supposed to bet Kentucky, like, in theory. I'm not laying 13.5 with them, but I am going under 46.5 here. I just think Kentucky is a really good under team. And, I feel like Vandy there has to be some kind of, they're not going to put up 40 again.
Just some other ones. Iowa State laying 3 at West Virginia. You got Syracuse laying 5 at NC State. Minnesota laying 5 at UCLA. Your travel thing.
I love the under in that game. It's 40. That's a sneaky over. Like, I've really been deep diving on these boards lately because I had like one of my best gambling weekends of all time last weekend. So I'm like super into it right now. And I spend an hour every Tuesday looking at the stuff. And I really like under 40 in that game. UCLA sucks, but they play hard on defense. Minnesota's got no explosive playmaking. That's going to be a really ugly game.
And then the other one that's interesting a little bit is this Colorado game. They get great TV numbers. Give them that. Colorado getting 4 at home against K-State.
I think this one could get a little wild. K-State, not known for this, but they've been playing some shootouts this year. They've been scoring a lot of points. Colorado, they're both off buys. It's 56.5, I believe. So I'm looking at the over here. The one concern I do have with Colorado, they're really transitioning the Big 12 well, because no Big 12, you don't deal with like many elite offensive and defensive lines, and that's what really gets Colorado is they're weaker in the trenches. But if it becomes an athlete fest, they got some dudes, especially that Will Shepherd receiver. And so I think this one could get a little wild. I like the over in this one. And so I'm gonna take that. K-State quarterback Avery Johnson, he's inconsistent throwing, but man, he can run. He's an athlete.
All right, let's roll through some NFL real quick. I have people every week that are like, hey, man, thanks for doing the NFL thing. I know it's a heavy college football show, but thanks for doing the NFL, so we'll do it quickly.
Okay, one last college game. We skipped Arizona at BYU. BYU's a 5-point favorite. It almost looks too easy because how good BYU's been. They're 5-0. I really like that quarterback. And I've just been kind of calling the fraud on Arizona all year. And I know they got me at Utah, but like last week, lost at home to Texas Tech. They got blown out at Kansas State. They struggled a couple times early in the year. I don't see why BYU will have any problem in that game. So that's one of the other ones I was looking at.
Okay. All right, we got the Thursday night game. Niners giving 3.5 to Seattle.
This is a rare spot where I like a road favorite, and I did some deep diving on the Niners this week. So weird that they're 2-3. They completely blew the Rams game on the road and the Arizona game last week when Jordan Mason fumbled on their 10. But Vegas is telling you everything you know. Neil, the Niners are 2-3. They're the favorite to win the NFC still. I mean, that says something. And this is a spot where Seattle's 3-2. They need this game in the division pretty bad because they've lost to Arizona and LA. And I think you're going to see a very business-like effort here where the Niners come out and show why they are what they are. And I think this is a bounce-back spot for them. So Seattle, fraudulent 3-0 start, playing a real weak schedule. Saw they lost at home to the Giants last week, and I don't think they're that good. So I'm on the Niners here.
All right, we got tea and crumpets for the Jags and the Bears. The Bears a 2-point favorite.
London game, part 2. And let me tell you something. The Jaguars might suck, but they always win in London. They do it every year. Even Urban Meyer went 1-15 and won in London. And right now, everybody's doing this Bears dance around Chicago, like they're 3-2. Man, I smell a total rat here, and I'm taking the Jags. And I feel like the public is all over the Bears and missing the point here. Until Jacksonville always wins in London, they're used to the London thing, and I'm taking the Jags here.
All right. Cleveland is at Philadelphia. It's a huge line. NFL teams, I saw a number on it. It's anything over 5.5, and you're winning good money if you just take the points. But this is a Cleveland team that's bad. You're getting 9 at Philly.
At what point is there going to be a revolt in the locker room about this Watson thing? I mean, what's going on in that locker room?
Paying him a ton of money, man.
Yeah, I'm mad at myself because I overthought that Browns-Commanders game last week. Washington was only 3.5, but I was like, man, it was like, this can't be this easy, and it was. I feel like going against Cleveland, I'm worried about being a week too late on it. They lost at Vegas as a favorite. They got blown out last week. I mean, I still think the Eagles win, but what's the old saying? You never want to be late to the party.
Yeah.
And I feel like we might have missed it on it. So, I would lean Philly, but I'm a little hesitant.
It's a big number. Another big number, Washington getting 6.5 at Baltimore over a Ravens team that just broke my heart Sunday.
Oh, I don't even want to. We got to touch on that quickly. So I had the Bengals plus 2.5. I was on it. I had a 30-1 parlay. Joe Burrow max over 325, Jamar Chase max over 120, and Bengals money line at 30-1, and they blew that. I mean, my God. Like I was so mad. Zach Taylor, they hand you the game in overtime at the
just go take it. Yeah, and instead he does the thing, and I know they trust the kicker, but come on.
I think it's a mindset thing because you got Joe Burrow throwing for 400 yards, and you're just going to play not to lose and run it up the middle and settle for a 53-yarder. I don't know.
Yeah,
man.
It'd be one thing if you were settling for a 33-yarder, but a 53-yarder? Come on. All right.
Yeah, that one's tough. But this Ravens-Commanders game, kind of spot, look, I can't go against the Commanders right now. There's no way. I am fascinated, though, by Jaden against the Baltimore defense because, at what point is there going to be some kind of a regression game? The Ravens run a very complex scheme. Could they cause them some problems? So I'm Commanders plus 6.5 or nothing,
Okay.
but Washington's too hot. And at what point do we realize that you just parlay the Commanders and the over every week because it's hit like 4 weeks in a row?
All right, we'll roll through these a little bit faster because I've got about 8 minutes till a hard out. Okay. Got Texans -7 at New England. Anything?
Nothing here. Drake May's first game. No Nico Collins is going to hurt Houston's firepower. Maybe under, but that's it.
All right, Cardinals getting 5 in Green Bay.
Cardinals have been fighting hard on the road, but I actually think this is a spot they may get blown out because that game in San Francisco last week was 102 degrees. I don't know if you saw any of that sideline, and Arizona pulled that out. I feel like there might be a hangover effort after how physical that game was and how much the heat was, and now you got to go to Lambeau.
Oh, yeah, could be. Saints struggling. Had a lot of injuries. Now they're having to go young quarterback. They're getting 3.5 at home against Tampa.
A lot of people, quick shout out, ton of Ole Miss people, including me, doing the doubleheader on Ole Miss-LSU and Saints-Bucks Sunday. So I'll be in there, and I have a lot of friends that'll be there. This is one. Look, Tampa's dealing with this hurricane right now, and honestly, I'm praying for their community because of how bad it looks. And you could say whatever you want, man. When people are worried about friends and family,
sure.
I mean, that's going to affect this week. I expect the Saints defense to play extremely hard in this game at 2-3 because a loss here is 2-4, and you're really, both the Saints and Ole Miss have just enormous games this week. Spencer Rattler hopefully going to go. It's hard to know what to expect. I think he'll run a little bit. He'll make some big throws, but I also think he's very susceptible to turning the ball over 2 to 3 times if he goes in this game. Kind of lean under 42 or 43. The Saints defense got manhandled on Monday Night Football. You got to think they know what's at stake this week, and you're going to play extremely hard. One quick thing to watch out for on props. Marshawn Lattimore has shut down Mike Evans his entire career, so this is a week to bet under Evans props.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, Colts are at in Nashville to play the Titans. The Colts are a 1-point favorite.
I don't really have an opinion. Tennessee usually does play well and beat Indy, but I don't have a real opinion here.
Okay. Pittsburgh is in Vegas. It's a 3-point Steelers favorite against the Raiders.
I like under 36.5. The Raiders are going with Aiden O'Connell. Devontae Adams not playing. They can't do anything on offense. And the Steelers, I mean, they're the same team they are every year. They're just playing ugly on offense. So I think this is going to be kind of, the standard. We look up in the fourth quarter and it's 12-9 or 13-9, and it's Mike Tomlin special.
Chargers giving 3 to Denver at Mile High.
Let's just put some respect back on Sean Payton's name. How the hell has he got this bunch 3-2?
He's good.
I mean,
he's really good.
I mean, it's crazy. I don't know that I trust him in this one, but I do just want to give him credit because I cannot believe they're 3-2. This is kind of a division rivalry game. The Chargers are off the bye. I think I'm going to probably just sit back on this one.
Detroit in Dallas as a 3-point favorite. The Cowboys have some injuries. Detroit still looks like a solid club. What do you think?
This one's got an extremely high over-under at 52.5, but I still like the over. There's a trend on Dallas that I've really been hitting lately. These games in Jerry World are very high scoring, and then on the road they're playing 2017, 2015. Their totals are inflated on the road. So, I'm betting these unders when Dallas is on the road, and I bet the overs at home, and I think this is another game that even at 52.5 should get pretty wild. So I kind of leaning the over.
A big number, but it's the Panthers. It's the Panthers at home, a 6-point dog to the Falcons. The Panthers are just horrible.
They're horrible, but this is the rat line of the week. 95% of the public's on Atlanta. Atlanta's every single game they've played's gone to the gun. I don't trust them laying 6 on the road. I know Carolina's terrible, but I think Atlanta's a sucker spot. I am looking at over 47.5 a little bit because they're both kind of playing. Carolina's playing some higher scoring games, but I'm real hesitant. I think a lot of suckers are going to take Atlanta -6 here, and it might be a mistake.
This is an interesting one here. Bengals laying 3.5 on the road Sunday night at New York. That defense is so bad that I don't know. And then the Giants are not a good offense, obviously, but New York getting 3.5 at home on a Sunday night.
Kind of picked up something on the Giants lately. They're better on the road than at home. They suck at home. Minnesota crushed them. They lost at home to Dallas. They're kind of like a weird, but then, they have road wins at Seattle and Cleveland in uglier games. I know the Bengals are 1-4, but Burrow and Chase have been cooking the last 3 weeks, and I think there's a level of professionalism where they're going to go out on Sunday Night Football and get this done. So I actually lean Cincinnati here.
And then the last one, Monday night, Buffalo at New York. I need to do the research on it. I always want to see what teams do the week after they fire their coach. I actually think the numbers favor the team that just fired the coach in week 1, then the hangover starts. But in this case, it's Buffalo in New York to face the Jets. The Bills are a 2-point favorite.
Looks like a rat line. I know Buffalo's lost a couple of in a row. But the over-under here, I saw 41, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And, man, I lean the under here. Jets' offense is really struggling. Aaron Rodgers didn't play well. Breece Hall's destroyed so many fantasy teams. And then Josh Allen, 9 of 30 last week against Houston.
Yeah.
Whew, that's rough. So, these are division rivals. I kind of think we're looking at a little bit of an uglier game. And so I'm going to go under. If you put a gun to my head, I would lean the Jets. But, I mean, I don't, who really knows?
As always, man, it's great to have you here. Again, you're going to be in Baton Rouge over the weekend, New Orleans on Sunday, so I know a lot of people will be looking for you if they see you. Hopefully,
please say hello. I'll be decked out in the Rebel Red, and I'll be all over both. And, one of my favorite, like I said, 22nd Ole Miss-LSU game in 25 years. Been a little sentimental about it this week. It's been a hell of a journey. Can't wait to get down there.
Ben, as always, thank you, sir.
I know you're busy on the hard out. Thanks, Neil. Appreciate it.
Our thanks to all of our guests today on the show, Matt Moscona, Chris Lee, Ben Mintz, getting us ready for another weekend of college football and the NFL on this edition of MPW Digital Extra presented by Rustic Revivals. Again, it's rusticrevivalsms.com, facebook.com/rusticrevivalsms, Rustic Revivals on Instagram. You can call them at 228-217-1243. You can email them at rusticrevivals@gmail.com. A lot more content coming your way here on MPW Digital before the weekend. We'll turn all of this into a podcast as well. So thanks for being with us. If you're heading down to Baton Rouge or wherever you might be headed this weekend, be safe, be careful, and have a great weekend. And we will talk to you again very soon.